Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back in time to the moment after Titanic vanished beneath the waves. Not the movie ending, not the romantic fade out, no. This is the cold, bitter, silent part. You're floating in the North Atlantic, somewhere past midnight in April 1912. The ship is gone. The screams are fading, the stars are terrifyingly bright like they're watching and not helping. And if you're in the water, well, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I make these stories for you, to help you unwind and wonder a little before bed. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing the range of cities and sleepy screens tuning in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not on the Titanic anymore, you're in a lifeboat. Or, if you weren't lucky enough, or rich enough, to get a seat, you might be clinging to a piece of wood, slipping in and out of consciousness. The water is below freezing, salt stinging your skin, and everything hurts. It's dark, so dark except for that brilliant, uncaring sky. The ocean is flat, eerily calm, the way it sometimes gets after something catastrophic, like it's pretending nothing happened. And the silence, that's what really hits you. After the chaos, the screaming, the roar of the great ship tearing itself apart, there's just silence. Maybe a few moans, maybe a baby crying, maybe someone in your boat whispering a prayer. But mostly it's the cold in that silence. If you're one of the few in Lifeboat 6, you've got Molly Brown sitting next to you. You don't know she's going to be famous yet. She's just loud, opinionated, and infuriatingly awake. She's insisting they go back for survivors, and a British officer is snapping at her to stay quiet and sit still. You're too tired to argue, or to help. You're wrapped in a borrowed coat, soaked to the bone, and trying not to look at the shadows bobbing in the water around you, because some of them aren't moving. One boat, Collapsible B, is flipped. Some men are literally crawling onto it like shipwrecked rats on a floating door. No, not that door. There's barely room to breathe, let alone move. One of them is the ship's wireless operator, Harold Bride, whose feet are frozen and whose hair is matted with blood. He'd been thrown into the water as the ship went down and somehow clawed his way here. You're not on his boat, but you can hear them. Whispers, groans. Someone saying, "Hold on, just hold on." You wonder how long until rescue. You were told the Carpathia is coming, but you don't know how far away it is. You just know that whatever happens, you have to stay awake. People who fall asleep don't wake up again out here. The wind cuts like a knife, and some of the rowers are too numb to grip the oars. The boat drifts. Time passes. Maybe an hour, maybe 3. You lose track. At one point, someone starts singing softly. "Nearer, my God, to thee." You don't know if it's a hymn or a haunting. You try not to think about the band that played it. You tell yourself they made it out. You'll find out later maybe they didn't. And then, a light. Tiny at first, then growing. Someone shouts, "A ship!" And for a moment your brain can't process it. But it's real. There, on the horizon. A speck, a glow, like a planet rising over the sea. The RMS Carpathia. The name spreads like wildfire through the boats. Carpathia, Carpathia, Carpathia. Some cry. Some pray. Some don't react at all. They're too far gone into their own heads. You clutch the edge of your seat, watching the little steamer pull closer. It's not a big ship, not like the Titanic was. You wonder how it'll even hold all of you. But it's coming. That's all that matters. It's coming. But you're not safe yet. The Carpathia can't just scoop you up all at once. It has to stop slowly and take the lifeboats one by one. You wait your turn, stomach clenching as each boat ahead is lifted. Some of the boats are so crowded they nearly tip. Others are half empty. Those officers wouldn't go back. You look at the stars, still watching, still not helping. One fringe fact. A few survivors later said they saw phantom ships that night, ghostly outlines in the distance that never came. Some believed it was the Californian, the ship that was just 10 miles away but never answered Titanic's distress rockets. Others thought they'd hallucinated from cold and trauma. One sailor insisted he saw a full-rigged sailing ship with glowing sails vanish into the mist. The real physical Carpathia is what matters now. And finally it's your turn. A rope ladder dangles. Crewmen shout down instructions. You're helped to your feet. Your legs wobble. And you cling to the side of the lifeboat as you reach for the ladder. It's awkward, slippery, terrifying. Someone has to push you from behind. Someone has to pull you up from above. When your feet hit the deck, you nearly collapse. Warm hands grab you. A blanket is thrown over your shoulders. A cup of something hot is placed in your numb fingers. You're inside the Carpathia. It's warm. It smells like sweat and smoke and damp wool. Someone is crying. Someone is laughing. Too loud, manic, unhinged. You look around and realize you made it. Not everyone did, but you're still here. That scholarly debate? Well, it still goes on today. Historians argue over how many more could have been saved if the lifeboats had gone back. Officially, fewer than 10 people were pulled from the water after Titanic sank, out of over 1,500 who went in. Why didn't they go back? Fear, chaos, orders, panic. It's complicated, messy, and no one fully agrees. What you know is this. It's over. The Titanic is gone. The sea has swallowed her whole. And now you're sailing away from the wreckage, toward land, headlines, and a future you never expected. You lean against the wall of the Carpathia's deckhouse, letting the heat of the ship seep into your frozen skin. Your ears are still ringing with the sounds of the night, but at least now there's a low hum of engines and the gentle sway of a ship with purpose. And you breathe. You're barely warm. Barely. The heat from the Carpathia's deck is real, sure, and the ship is moving, southward, toward New York. But your clothes are still damp, your bones still ache, and your brain hasn't caught up with the idea that you're no longer dying. You sit curled against the bulkhead, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that smells like engine oil and someone else's fear. Your lips are split, your fingers stiff and waxy, but still, somehow, they twitch. You're alive. It's the Carpathia, that steamship no one on Titanic paid attention to, because she was smaller, older, slower. But tonight she's your saviour. The RMS Carpathia had been steaming from New York to Fiume, in what's now Croatia, when her wireless operator caught Titanic's frantic Morse code, CQD, the old distress call, and then SOS, the newer, even more urgent signal. The message: we have struck iceberg, come at once. Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron, didn't hesitate. He did a full U-turn and pushed his engines harder than they were ever designed to go. And now here she is, glowing with lanterns in the darkness, slowly becoming a floating orphanage. You're not alone on deck. Other survivors slump nearby, some in shock, some whispering their stories already, as if retelling the horror will push it further away. A woman near you keeps asking where her baby is. No one has the heart to answer. A man in a tuxedo stares blankly at the stars, lips moving in a silent prayer. Or maybe he's just trying to remember the last moment he saw his wife. The crew of the Carpathia moves quickly. Rostron has turned his ship into a machine of rescue. Stewards hand out hot drinks, doctors check the half-conscious, and crewmen toss blankets like life preservers. They even built extra lifeboat davits on the fly just to haul Titanic's boats aboard. Every corner of the ship is now a makeshift shelter. The first-class dining room is packed with the second and third-class survivors. No one cares about the class divide tonight, at least not openly, but there are whispers, always whispers, about who made it and who didn't. There's one lifeboat with only 12 people in it, even though it could hold 65. You hear that one woman refused to let more in. They say her furs were more important than other people's children. That rumour spreads like wildfire. And you're already learning, truth and gossip are going to get tangled real fast. Some of the Titanic's lifeboats are battered, half flooded, with oars floating loose. You see one, boat 14, that actually did go back. Officer Harold Lowe, the only one to return for survivors in the water, pulled 4 freezing people out of the ocean. 1 lived. Just 1. You see him too, Lowe, pacing the deck, trying to be useful, but he's not speaking much. His face is pinched. You don't blame him. He's a sailor who followed orders, rowed back into hell, and probably still doesn't know whether to be proud or haunted. You're herded below deck eventually, blinking in the lamplight. A Carpathia steward guides you gently but firmly down a narrow stairwell. Your knees nearly buckle. Every step feels like it might be your last. The corridor smells of sweat and damp leather. You're taken to a cabin. Not yours, not really anyone's. Just space that was once for passengers but is now a hospital ward. You're laid on a cot, someone tucks the blanket tighter around you, and a tin cup of something hot, tea maybe, broth, is pressed into your hand. It burns, and you love it. It tastes awful, and you want more. And then, finally, you sleep. When you wake, it's still dark outside, the ship is still moving, but the air is different now, less frantic, more heavy. The horror is setting in, curling like fog through every corridor. Some people are talking, softly, slowly. Others are still crying. Others are wandering the halls like ghosts. You make your way to the deck. You want air, fresh air. It's still freezing, but the stars don't look so cruel now. Maybe because Carpathia's smokestacks are there, puffing warm soot into the sky like a lighthouse. A steward beside you mutters something about the death list. You glance over his shoulder and see a sheet of names, typed, copied, and already smudged with wet fingers. It's not long enough, just the survivors. Everyone else? Unconfirmed. Then you hear a name, Phillips, one of Titanic's wireless operators, dead. Worked until the power went out, then went topside to help launch lifeboats. A quiet hero. His partner, Harold Bride, the one with the frozen feet, is alive and somewhere on board. You make a note to find him later. Oh, and here's a weird one. In the middle of the chaos, the Carpathia crew actually had time to conduct a marriage ceremony. True story. 2 steerage passengers from Titanic, both survived, both already engaged, asked the captain to marry them right there on deck. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was trauma bonding. Maybe they just needed something joyful to keep from unravelling. You're not sure how to feel about it. But it happened. Down below, the Carpathia's own passengers are giving up their rooms, their clothes, their boots, anything to help. One woman gives away all her spare coats. Another spends the entire night spoon-feeding broth to steerage children she doesn't know. And yet, even here, there's tension. Titanic's surviving first-class passengers, especially the men, are being eyed with suspicion. Whispers like, "He bought his way onto that boat," or "I heard he pushed past women and children." Some of them keep their heads down. Others, already rehearsing statements for the press. You can feel it. The way they shift their stories slightly with each retelling. Not lying, just editing. Captain Rostron, though, he's solid, calm, professional. He holds an interfaith service on deck just after dawn. Survivors gather to sing hymns for the dead. The ocean glitters below, cold and bottomless. Some of the crew cry. Some of the passengers just stare into the sea like they expect ghosts to float up. There's a debate starting already, among the survivors, among the Carpathia's officers. Did Titanic ignore the iceberg warnings? Were they going too fast? Did they really not have enough lifeboats? You don't know yet, but you will. For now you hold on to the rail, you're not ready for land, not yet. But it's coming. The Carpathia is steaming toward New York. Word's already been sent ahead. Reporters will be waiting. So will families. So will politicians. You're not just a passenger anymore. You're a survivor of Titanic. And your real journey hasn't even started. Morning on the Carpathia is a strange blend of grief and oatmeal. The air smells like ship fuel, damp wool, and an overwhelming sense of what now? You wake up to the rattle of trays and the murmur of crew passing in the narrow corridors. Someone drops a kettle. Someone else sneezes so hard they cry. Your legs are sore. You can feel every muscle in your body, like your bones themselves are bruised. There's a tight ache behind your eyes. Not quite a headache, but a pulsing reminder that you're running on borrowed strength. You should feel grateful, and maybe you do. But mostly, you feel wrong. You shuffle toward the dining saloon, following the smell of food. The Carpathia crew is serving what they can. Watery porridge, dry bread, tea that's more leaf than liquid. But it's hot, and it's yours, and you eat every bite like it's the first meal you've ever had. You look around and realise this room, this one narrow space, now holds hundreds of Titanic survivors. Men without shoes, women in mismatched clothes, children holding someone else's hand. There's talking now, low murmurs. No one dares raise their voice. It's like you're all in a chapel made of steel. People are piecing together the timeline. The iceberg was spotted around 11:40, someone mutters. No, it was earlier. I felt something. You hear someone else whisper. I saw Captain Smith give the order. He was calm, I think. Everyone's story is a little different. Some details match, others don't. A woman says she heard an explosion from below. A steward insists there was no panic. A young boy claims he saw someone shot at the lifeboats. You're learning that memory bends under pressure. Truth, trauma, and the Titanic don't play by the same rules. A group of women sits huddled at the far table. Third-class passengers still in their travel shawls and nightgowns. You hear a nurse speaking Irish softly to one of them. The girl just stares. Her mother didn't make it. You feel a hand on your shoulder. It's one of the Carpathia's crewmen, a wiry young guy with sleep-deprived eyes and soot smudged across his brow. He asks your name, your age, if you're injured, if you have any relatives in New York. You answer automatically. He scribbles on a clipboard and moves on. You realise he's doing triage on you, not your body, but your situation. You're shuffled to another room, this one smaller, filled with strange beeping and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of Morse code. You've found the wireless room. It's chaos. The Carpathia's operators are working around the clock, sending lists of names to New York. Survivors, dead, missing. They've cleared off a desk and let people send short messages to family. You scribble a few words. Safe, on Carpathia. Arrive NYC soon. It's all you can fit. Someone takes your note and adds it to a growing pile. You don't know if it'll reach anyone. You don't even know who got your last letters. Everything feels like it happened a decade ago. A teenage girl brushes past you. She's barefoot, hair matted, cradling a small dog. You blink. Yes, it's a dog. A Pomeranian, wet and shaking. She must have smuggled it into a lifeboat. You're briefly annoyed. A dog got a spot someone else didn't. Then you're jealous. That dog has someone to hold it. Nearby, you overhear a grim conversation between two sailors. They talk about the bodies. Not the ones on the Carpathia. There aren't many of those. They're talking about the ones left behind, floating, cold, still wearing tuxedos, life vests, jewels. The crew saw them from the deck as they approached. You're told not to talk about it. You wander again. There's nowhere you're supposed to be, which somehow makes you feel more lost. You drift through the corridors like the Carpathia itself, full of people with no destination except away. Eventually you find someone you recognise. You don't know their name, just their face, from the lifeboat. You sit down next to each other and say nothing. That's enough. Now here comes one of those fringe facts. Somewhere aboard, someone starts a rumour that a famous mummy from the British Museum was secretly in Titanic's cargo hold and cursed the whole voyage. You scoff at first, but then you see 3 separate passengers whispering about it. One woman swears she overheard a steward talking about Egyptian relics in the baggage room. Someone else claims they saw the mummy loaded in Southampton. Of course, none of it's true. But the idea of a curse? Honestly? It starts sounding less ridiculous the longer you sit with what just happened. And now the reporters are circling. Well, not here, not yet, but they're coming. Word is the Carpathia's radio messages are being intercepted. Journalists in New York already know the Titanic went down, and they know you're coming. You feel a sudden chill, not from the wind, but from the idea of being watched, of being consumed. Your tragedy is about to become someone else's headline. Some survivors are already composing statements. Not just first-class men either. Everyone has something to say. Some of them are even changing their stories, softening the panic, emphasizing the bravery, skipping over the ugly parts. You see a man in a blanket giving what looks suspiciously like an interview to one of the Carpathia's officers. He gestures with his hands, reenacting the tilt of the ship, the crack as the stern rose, the swell of voices. You wonder if he's telling the truth or if he's already rewriting history. Then there's the open debate simmering in hushed corners of the deck. Why weren't there more lifeboats? You overhear one man say Titanic was unsinkable. He heard it from the engineers. Another snorts. Then why did it sink? A woman nearby mutters, "We asked about the lifeboats on day one. They said regulations didn't require more." Regulations. You cling to that word like it's a jagged stone. That's the excuse? The reason so many are gone? Because of regulations. By nightfall, the Carpathia's cabins are packed beyond capacity. You curl up in a corner, next to a family of 5, now a family of 3. The mother stares straight ahead. The child whimpers. You lend them your blanket. You don't sleep. You're afraid of dreaming about the water. Outside, the ship's engines thrum steadily. You're still 2 days from land. But already you feel the pull of the world waiting for you. And it's not mercy that's coming. It's questions. You feel it before you see it. That subtle shift in energy, the buzz rising from below deck, the uptick in footsteps, the quickened pace of the crew. You're close now. New York is on the horizon. It's been 4 days since the Carpathia turned from cruise liner to rescue ship. 4 days of makeshift beds, lukewarm broth, whispered nightmares, and the growing sense that whatever comes next won't be easier than what you've just survived. You're different now. Every survivor is. There's a weight behind your eyes, like you're carrying someone else's soul inside your ribs, maybe more than one. You're up on deck again, squeezed between survivors and Carpathia passengers, everyone jostling for a glimpse of land. The air smells different. Still salty, but with a hint of harbour smoke and industry. That gritty New York scent creeping across the sea. And then, there it is. The skyline is still forming, a jagged line against a silver-grey morning. The Statue of Liberty stands in the haze, smaller than you imagined. You're not sure if it's comforting or ironic. She looks cold, distant, like she's seen too many ships arrive with stories like yours, but the crowd's already stirring. Some cheer, some weep, others just stare, unmoving. You're one of the latter, not because you're emotionless, but because you have no idea what to feel anymore. Then you notice the boats. They're everywhere. Tugboats, ferries, private steamers, news vessels, all circling like sharks with notebooks. You see cameras, reporters in heavy coats with flashbulbs cocked. One small boat sails dangerously close to the Carpathia's hull, and a voice shouts up through a megaphone, "Is Molly Brown aboard?" You flinch. They're not just here to welcome you. They're here to mine you, to dig through your trauma and sell the shiny pieces. By the time the Carpathia finally eases into Pier 54, it's chaos. Not screaming, panicked chaos. Just the kind that happens when too many people want too many things all at once. Families crowd the dock, eyes wild with hope and dread. Reporters climb fences. Police try to hold the line. You clutch your borrowed coat tighter around you, heart pounding. Some survivors are the first to disembark. Children, the injured, the elderly. They're met with a blur of flashbulbs and questions. What happened? Who was at fault? Did the band really play until the end? Were you in a lifeboat with Isidore Strauss? Did Bruce Ismay really escape in a dress? You see her, Molly Brown, descending the gangway with the same fire she had in the lifeboat. She's bundled in furs, flanked by journalists, but she's not basking in it. She's barking orders. Where are the orphans? Make way for the women in steerage. You lose sight of her as the crowd swallows everything. Your turn comes. You step onto the gangway, legs wobbly. The boards creak beneath you. Each footstep echoes like a drumbeat. Alive, alive, alive. At the bottom, a policeman stops you. Name? You give it. He checks a list. Anyone meeting you? You think. A cousin? An address scribbled in your bag? You nod. He waves you through. The air on the pier is thick, smoke, rain, and perfume all mingling into a sour soup. You're handed something, a sandwich. No idea what's in it, but you bite anyway. Food has lost all meaning, really. It's just fuel now. You're herded with a group of survivors toward the Seamen's Church Institute nearby, where aid workers are doling out clothes, shelter, and telegram forms. You're offered a place to sit, but your legs won't bend. You just stand, staring at the stained glass, and wonder if your shoes will ever dry completely. Everywhere you turn, someone's weeping, or being interviewed, or doing both at once. And then someone hands you a paper. It's the New York Times, hot off the press. The headline screams, "Titanic sinks, 1,500 feared dead." You stare at it. That number, 1,500, it doesn't look real. It's too big, too neat. But it's there, printed in black and white, and now it belongs to the world. You spot names you recognise, some in the survivor list, some in the dead, and some not mentioned at all. Now for the historical fact. The Carpathia docked just after 9 p.m. on April 18th, 1912. It took nearly 4 hours to unload all the survivors because the Titanic's own lifeboats, 12 of them, had to be lowered by crane first before passengers could disembark. The press swarmed the pier, and Titanic's owner J. Bruce Ismay slipped off quietly, avoiding reporters. You'll hear more about him soon. Trust me. Then the fringe moment. A local psychic claimed he predicted Titanic sinking 2 months prior, and had even written it down. Whether he did or not, debatable. But spiritualists were quick to turn Titanic into a cosmic warning, and seances surged in popularity. You'll be invited to one eventually, probably more than one. As you make your way through the crowd, a man in a suit shoves a paper at you. Your testimony's needed, he says. Senate hearings start Monday. You blink. What? That's right. The US Senate is launching a full investigation, starting immediately. Survivors, passengers, crew, officers are being asked to testify. They want the truth, or some version of it. You're handed a card with an address, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because the idea of giving evidence while wearing a donated overcoat and 2 left shoes feels surreal. Later that night, you find yourself in a shelter dormitory. It smells like talcum powder and soup. You lie on a cot staring at the ceiling, replaying the dockside madness. You think about the boy who cried when his name wasn't on the list, the woman screaming for her husband, the man who claimed he saw Captain Smith floating on a door, alive, and was immediately swarmed by reporters. You can't sleep. Not yet. Somewhere out there, Titanic is still sinking. Over and over. In newspapers. In rumours. In nightmares. And you? You just made it ashore. You wake up in a real bed. Not a cot, not a bench, not the damp floor of a ship, but an actual bed. With sheets and pillows. You blink, momentarily unsure where you are. There's sunlight bleeding through dusty curtains and the distant clatter of dishes down a hallway. You sit up slowly. Your limbs feel like they belong to someone else. You're in a hotel now, a modest one, nothing like Titanic's grandeur, but it smells clean and the roof isn't trying to kill you. One of the relief agencies placed you here. Probably the Red Cross, or the Women's Relief Committee. You've been passed through so many hands in the last day that you've lost track of who's helping and who's documenting. You stand, stretch, and catch sight of yourself in a cloudy mirror. Yikes. You look like you've crawled through a chimney. Your face is sunken, your skin pale and wind-chapped, and your eyes, yeah, they've seen things. You shuffle into the hallway where a volunteer in a stiff dress and frizzy bun greets you with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She hands you a cup of coffee and a boiled egg wrapped in paper. You nod your thanks. She's already turning to help someone else. The place is full of Titanic survivors now, scattered across rooms and floors like displaced royalty and wandering ghosts. You find a quiet spot in the lobby and settle in. A newspaper lies abandoned on a table nearby. Same headline, different day. Titanic. Who is to blame? Oh, and here we go. White Star Line issue statement. Your fingers tighten on the paper. According to the White Star Line, Titanic's parent company, everything that could have been done was done. No negligence, no design flaw, no unnecessary speed. Just a tragedy. A freak. Heartbreaking accident. You read it again. Your jaw clenches. You were there. You remember the locked gates in third class, the missing binoculars in the crow's nest, the half-empty lifeboats lowered into the black with officers screaming at women to sit down and row. Or worse, stay quiet and not go back. And yet, here's the White Star Line doing what corporations do best. Spinning. Denying. Deflecting. Later that morning, a White Star Line representative visits the hotel. He's neat, polished, wearing a bowler hat too clean for comfort. He gathers survivors in the lounge and passes out release forms. Legal documents. You squint at yours. It's a waiver. Basically says you won't sue the company in exchange for a modest payout. Enough for train fare and maybe a week's rent. You look around. Some people sign. Others stare, numb. A few survivors start arguing. You want us to sign this? A woman demands. My husband died, and you're offering me $30? The rep shrugs. It's company policy. You don't sign. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Now for something quietly chilling. White Star Line also sent a special train, a private express, to take surviving crew members directly from the dock to the company's offices. No press, no interviews, just whisked away under the radar. You realise they're not being protected. They're being controlled. The fewer loose lips, the better. You step outside for air. New York is loud. Streetcars rattling, car horns blaring, people shouting over pushcarts and newspaper boys yelling headlines. You blend in easily. No one on the street can tell you're a Titanic survivor. You're just another tired face in a city full of them, until someone recognises you. A reporter, maybe 17, with ink on his fingers and a notebook already out. Excuse me, were you aboard the Titanic? You hesitate. Lie? Walk away? But you nod. He lights up. Did it break in two? Did you hear explosions? Were the officers armed? You blink. That's a lot. It was dark, you mumble. There were screams. I'd just gotten a lifeboat. He writes that down. What about Captain Smith? Did you see him shoot himself? Did Bruce Ismay order the ship to go faster? You step back. Look, I don't know. But the questions keep coming, and he's just one of dozens. By evening, the city will be crawling with stories, some true, many not. You'll read headlines about heroic engineers, cowardly millionaires, unsinkable women, and mothers who gave up their babies to strangers. Some of it will be accurate, some will be theatre. And Bruce Ismay? Oh, he's already back in his hotel suite. He got off the Carpathia quietly, flanked by bodyguards, and ducked into the Waldorf Astoria like a rat vanishing into a velvet-lined hole. You hear that he cabled White Star headquarters before he spoke to the press or even the families. His first concern wasn't the dead, it was the company. Now the scholarly debate. Was Ismay a coward or just a survivor? He did help load lifeboats. He was seen encouraging women to board, but he also climbed into one himself. Lifeboat C, not the last boat, not even close, and he lived. That part sticks. People are furious. He's being painted as the villain. Political cartoons are already showing him hiding in a bonnet, clutching his stock certificates as the ship sinks behind him. But it's not that simple, is it ever? You return to the hotel, shaken, and find a woman sobbing in the stairwell. Her name is Eleanor. She lost 2 children. She keeps muttering their names over and over, rocking back and forth. No one knows what to say. So you sit beside her. You don't speak. You just sit. Because that's what survivors do. You carry each other. That night you're invited to a memorial service, one of many. Churches all over New York are holding them. Some light candles. Some read out the list of the lost. Others play hymns that were supposedly heard as the Titanic went under. You don't stay long. Too many eyes. Too much weeping. Back in your room, you lie down and stare at the ceiling. You try to remember the stars the night the ship sank. They were beautiful, cold, indifferent. You wonder how many of the stories printed in the morning paper will be true. You wonder if your story will be one of them. You're on a boat again. Yeah, you thought you were done with ships for a while, didn't you? But here you are, back on the Atlantic, only this time it's not a grand liner or a frantic lifeboat. It's a cable steamer named the Mackay Bennett, chartered not for passengers, not for cargo, but for one grim task, recovering the dead. You're not a passenger, not officially, but you're here, volunteering, or maybe just drifting, because you knew someone who didn't survive. Or maybe you were part of the crew, or maybe after days of restless pacing and too many people asking if you were lucky, you just needed to do something that felt honest. Either way, you're aboard, and the air is heavy with a silence that makes the wind itself feel guilty. The Mackay Bennett left Halifax, Nova Scotia, packed with coffins, embalming supplies, ice and undertakers. It's cold up here, not just the sea air, but the mission. Every man on board has that same expression, grim resolve with a side of, how did this become my life? They reached the site on April 20th. It's been 5 days since Titanic vanished beneath the waves. You stand on the deck, hands jammed into your coat pockets, watching as crewmen scan the water. The ocean looks normal, deceptively serene. But then, you see them, bodies. Dozens at first, then more, floating like driftwood. Life vests keeping them eerily upright, faces turned to the sky. Men in dinner jackets, women in nightgowns, children, still small enough to be mistaken for dolls at a distance. The crew doesn't flinch. They get to work. They use grappling hooks and boat hooks, tools meant for mooring lines now repurposed for the unthinkable. The dead are pulled gently aboard, identified if possible, catalogued, their pockets searched, jewellery removed and tagged, bodies judged. Is this one well preserved enough to be embalmed? If yes, it's prepared for a coffin. If not, canvas wrapping, seawater rinse, and eventually a burial at sea. You try not to look, but you do. One body wears a top hat, another clutches a violin case. One child is so pale, so perfect, you half expect her to open her eyes. They found 306 bodies over the course of a week. Only 116 were brought back to land. The rest, too far gone, too unidentifiable, were committed to the sea. Here's a hard historical fact. The bodies that were embalmed and returned were, almost without exception, first-class passengers. Not because of malice, just logistics. Embalming supplies were limited. Only those who could pay for storage, or were assumed to have families who could, were preserved. Steerage passengers were more often buried at sea. That hits you like a hammer. Death itself wasn't equal. Even now, you watch as one body is laid on the deck. A boy, no older than 4. Pale blonde hair, soft features, tiny hands curled at his sides. No ID, no tags, just a sweet, lifeless face. The sailors freeze. One of them removes his cap. Another mutters something. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. They name him the unknown child. That name will follow him for almost 100 years. Later, long after this voyage is over, DNA testing will reveal his identity. Sidney Leslie Goodwin, aged 19 months from England. He died with his entire family. But for now, he's just a symbol, a question without an answer. You help carry his body to the makeshift morgue below deck. It smells like bleach and brine. Your boots echo on the metal floor. You realise you haven't spoken all day. Someone jokes, not cruelly, that Titanic's lifeboats are more seaworthy than they thought. The Mackie Bennett towed them back to Halifax, still floating. Some of the lifeboats even have bloodstains in them. Others, strange markings. Names scratched into the wood by desperate passengers, hoping someone someday would know they were there. Back on deck, you see something odd. One of the sailors is folding a letter. He tucks it into a waterproof jar, ties it to a body and whispers, "Go home." You don't ask. You don't want to know. The fringe fact. One of the recovery ships, Minia, later brought back a pocket watch that had stopped at 2:20 a.m, the exact moment Titanic went under. They found it on a man's body. It became an eerie confirmation, a physical timestamp burned into brass and glass by salt water and loss. And here's the scholarly debate. Some argue the bodies were misidentified, records were rushed, errors were made. A few family members claimed the wrong remains were returned. Were they? Could they have been? There's no way to be sure. Even the clothes survivors described didn't always match what was catalogued. You help with the burials. You stand at the rail as canvas-wrapped forms are slid overboard, feet first, into the ocean that took them. Some get prayers, some get silence, but all of them, every single one, deserve to be remembered. When the Mackay Bennett returns to Halifax, the docks are lined with families, reporters, police, horses pulling hearses. A warehouse has been converted into a morgue. Coffins are stacked in rows. Some families come for confirmation, others for closure, others just to hope. You stand at the back, unnoticed, watching a woman sob as she recognises her husband's watch. A brother identifies his sister by the brooch still pinned to her collar. A father finds his son's shoes. It's all too much. But it's not even close to enough. Later, the Titanic's lifeboats are auctioned off. A few are bought as souvenirs. One ends up in someone's garden. Another is repurposed as a fishing dinghy, because apparently nothing's sacred. You return to New York in silence. The train rocks gently beneath you. You stare out the window and think about the faces in the water. Not just the ones you helped pull aboard, but the ones you missed. The ones still out there. The ones who didn't float. You close your eyes, and they're there. Always. You made it out of the lifeboat, but part of you never left that sea. The wind tastes different in Halifax, saltier, colder, and laced with something that settles in your throat like dust you can't quite cough out. You've returned with the Mackay Bennett, disembarked quietly, and found yourself standing outside a place you never thought you'd be visiting. A temporary morgue set up in a curling rink. Yeah, a curling rink. Not exactly the sacred ground you'd hope for, but then again, no one planned for this many dead at once. The city did what it could. Inside, the ice has been melted, the floor scrubbed, and hundreds of plain wooden coffins arranged in neat rows. Each one has a number. No names yet, just numbers. You drift among them, stunned by the sheer volume. Some are closed, some are waiting for someone to come identify the face inside. A few are tiny, children of course. You stop in front of one no different than the others, and feel your knees start to buckle. You don't even know this person, not really, but you could have. A volunteer gently guides you away, murmuring, "They're being buried tomorrow, the ones whose families can't be found." You nod, hollowly. You're still trying to wrap your head around how death can be so organised, so bureaucratic. Down the road, at Fairview Lawn Cemetery, the burial plots are being marked. Rows of small white granite stones will eventually line the hill, each one etched with a date, April 15th, 1912, and for many that's all, just the date. A few will get names later, once matches are confirmed. Others remain anonymous, forever. You attend the funeral, not because you have to, because you can't not. The priest says the right things, the choir sings softly. Mourners line the hill in black coats, hats pulled low, scarves wrapped tight. It's raining, of course it is, and the sky is the colour of dishwater. Cold droplets tap the wooden coffins like impatient fingers. No one speaks louder than a whisper. Then something strange happens. A young woman you haven't seen before steps up to one of the coffins. She kneels, opens a small satchel, and pulls out a framed photograph. She places it gently on the wood, murmurs something in what sounds like Polish, then walks away without looking back. No one moves to stop her. No one asks who she was. It doesn't matter. Everyone here lost someone. Now, a little-known historical detail. White Star Line refused to pay for the burials. The cost, around $125 per casket, fell on the families and the city of Halifax. Some relatives simply couldn't afford to reclaim the bodies, especially those from Europe or third-class passengers. Halifax stepped up, footing the bill for dozens, but it left a bitter taste. A ship that cost $7.5 million to build couldn't find change for a funeral. The debate continues, even now. Why wasn't Titanic better prepared for death? There were no body bags on board, no corpse storage, no plans for mass casualties. Maybe it was pride, or denial, or simply bad logistics. Scholars still argue whether the ship's designers truly believed in its invincibility, or if they just didn't want to scare wealthy passengers with too many visible lifeboats and safety measures. You remember overhearing a steward on the first day back on Titanic. He joked, "There aren't enough lifeboats, but don't worry. You won't need one unless we hit something really stupid, like a mountain." It had been funny then. Kind of. Now it echoes. Back in Halifax, people are lining up outside the telegraph office, desperate to know if their loved ones were found. Some bring photographs, others just names. A few are angry. One man demands to know why his son was buried at sea without permission. Another wants to exhume a body, just to make sure it was his wife. No one has easy answers. You walk along the waterfront later that day. The harbour is calm. Fishermen pass by in small boats, unaware or pretending not to notice, the grief drifting through the streets like morning fog. And here's your fringe moment. One of the recovery ships, the Montmagny, brings back a bag of potatoes they found floating near the wreck site. Not exactly sacred relics, but some New Yorkers actually bid on them in an auction later, believing they were unsinkable vegetables. One sold for more than a gold ring. People are weird like that. Before you leave Halifax, you take one last walk through the cemetery. There's a single grave that stands out. Simple stone, small engraving. A child of the Titanic. No name, no photo, just that. You stand there for a while, longer than you expected. You think about the lifeboats again, how most of them were only half full, how the crew wasn't trained, how third-class passengers were held back, funneled through mazes of corridors and metal gates. It never had to be this bad. You find out later that one of the undertakers aboard the Mackay Bennett had a journal. In it he wrote, "The worst part is the stillness. Not the cold, not the smell, but the silence. So many lives ended, and nothing left but the quiet." You understand what he means. You board a train back to New York, exhausted in a way that sleep can't fix. You lean your forehead against the window, watching the tracks blur into forests, towns, and farmland. The world keeps going. That part still surprises you. A child in the seat behind you keeps asking their mother, "What happened to the big boat?" The mother doesn't answer. She just shushes him and strokes his hair. You close your eyes. The sea is still there, inside you, not moving and not speaking, just waiting. It's Monday morning and you're back in New York, standing under a towering marble arch that reads United States Capitol. Only this one's on the wrong coast. Welcome to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, temporary home of the US Senate inquiry into the Titanic disaster. Yeah, a Senate inquiry, in a luxury hotel ballroom, because nothing says government investigation like velvet drapes and finger sandwiches. You weren't summoned, not officially, but people are showing up anyway. Survivors, crew, lawyers, reporters, grieving families. It's like the Titanic has been resurrected in dress shoes and neckties. There's an air of barely contained chaos, like everyone's waiting for someone to start shouting or crying or fainting or confessing something scandalous. You walk past a crowd of men in identical suits and bowler hats, whispering into one another's ears and glancing at a clipboard full of names. You catch a few: Lightoller, Pittman, Lowe. All officers from the Titanic, now subpoenaed, testifying under oath. And then there's Senator William Alden Smith, a man with a booming voice, a cartoonish moustache, and the self-righteous energy of someone who just discovered icebergs existed. He's leading the charge. He's furious. He's appalled. And most of all, he's confused by how a ship this fancy could go down faster than a glass of bourbon at a congressional luncheon. You slip into the back of the ballroom, where rows of chairs creak under the weight of survivors and onlookers. The senators sit at a long table near the front, their expressions swinging between sympathy and theatrical outrage. This isn't just about answers, it's about optics. A White Star Line executive is on the stand. He looks like he hasn't slept since the Carpathia docked. Were there sufficient lifeboats aboard Titanic, one senator asks. A pause. There were as many as required by law, the man replies carefully. You nearly scoff. So does half the room. Another senator cuts in. But not enough for all passengers? The exec clears his throat. No, sir. Someone mutters behind you. What about enough for half? And you can't tell if it's a joke or just math. Then comes Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the highest-ranking surviving officer. He's composed, professional, but you can see the strain under his eyes. He testifies that the ship sank intact, didn't break in two. You frown. That's not what you saw or heard. But others echo him. A lot of survivors are giving similar versions of events. Clean, honourable, cohesive. You realise what's happening? People are sanitising their trauma for the record. Whether out of loyalty, guilt, or sheer exhaustion, they're tidying the narrative like good sailors folding blankets. Now for your historical fact. The US Senate inquiry began on April 19, 1912, just one day after the Carpathia arrived. Smith summoned dozens of passengers and crew, often without legal representation, and dragged them into hearings that lasted nearly a month. His tactics were aggressive, sometimes uninformed. He famously asked if icebergs could be seen from the crow's nest on a clear night. Spoiler. Yes, Bill. That's literally the whole point. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, a group of third-class survivors sits on a bench, awkwardly flipping through newspapers with their own faces in them. No one's asked them to testify yet. One young woman says, "Maybe if I drowned, they'd care more." You don't laugh. 'Cause she's not wrong. You overhear two lawyers debating whether the Titanic's design contributed to the disaster. The watertight bulkheads weren't actually watertight, one argues. They didn't go high enough. The ship filled like an ice cube tray. The other shakes his head. That wasn't the problem. It was the rivets. Poor quality. Snapped like crackers. You store that away. Another mystery, another contradiction. Now the fringe fact. At one point, a passenger who wasn't even on the Titanic testified. He claimed to have intuitively felt the iceberg from his home in Ohio. The senators politely dismissed him after 5 minutes, but not before he suggested that transatlantic liners should be equipped with spiritual ice detection. You're honestly not sure if he was joking. Back in the ballroom, someone mentions the Californian, that other ship that maybe saw Titanic's distress rockets. A murmur spreads across the room like spilled ink. Everyone wants to know. Why didn't they help? The Californian's captain, Stanley Lord, isn't present, yet. But the heat is building. According to some testimonies, his wireless operator turned off the radio for the night, even as Titanic sent its desperate calls. He's either the worst kind of negligent or the most tragically unlucky man on the sea. You wonder which version history will remember. The day drags on. Testimony piles up. Lifeboat procedures, iceberg warnings, speed records, binoculars that never made it to the lookout. At one point, someone brings up the fact that the ship had a fire in its coal bunker before it even left Southampton. Yeah, that happened. A smouldering coal fire that might have weakened the very spot where the iceberg struck. It's hard to say for sure. You file that away too. There's another debate happening quietly in the back of the room. Should we keep building bigger ships? Is this disaster a wake-up call, or just a fluke? One senator jokes that he'd like a boat with more lifeboats than chandeliers. No one laughs. You step outside for air and find a row of reporters smoking and jotting notes. One of them sketching a cartoon of Senator Smith holding an iceberg like a cigar. Another says, "Give it 6 months. Someone will write a novel about this." Someone already has. You heard it's being serialized in the New York World next week. Fiction based on facts no one fully understands yet. You return inside just in time to see Ismay walk in. J. Bruce Ismay, president of the White Star Line. Ghost-pale, stone-faced, already infamous. He sits before the senators, and the questions begin. "Why were you on a lifeboat, sir?" He swallows hard. "There were no women or children nearby. The boat was being lowered." "And you didn't consider staying aboard?" "I did what I thought was best. At the time." You can feel the judgment rise like heat from the floorboards. His words land like wet laundry, limp, damp, and unconvincing. He's not lying exactly, but you can hear the damage in every syllable. You head back to your room that evening, too wired to sleep, too tired to care. You lie awake thinking of all the voices you heard today, the ones who made it sound noble, the ones who tried to forget, the ones who never got to speak. And you wonder, when this inquiry ends, will the truth still matter? Or will it just be the best-sounding version that survives? It's not a courtroom. It's a polished room full of dark suits, gleaming boots, and voices that don't rise above mildly annoyed. Welcome to the British Inquiry, where tea flows more freely than truth, and the Titanic sinking feels more like a gentle inconvenience than the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in modern history. You're in London now, or at least you feel like you are, surrounded by English accents, stiff collars, and the unmistakable smell of expensive cologne and denial. Technically, the hearings are held at the Scottish Drill Hall, a grand building that, under better circumstances, hosts military inspections and charitable dances. But today, it's where the British Board of Trade is doing its best to look concerned while quietly saving face. You find a seat near the back, between a woman dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and a journalist sketching the scene on a pad with flair. He's drawn one of the judges with a monocle the size of a dinner plate. You smirk. Lord Mersey, the man leading the inquiry, sits front and centre. His full name is John Charles Bigham, 1st Viscount Mersey, and he looks exactly how you'd expect a Viscount in charge of sweeping things under a rug to look. He leans back in his chair like this is just another Tuesday. You wonder if he rehearsed his size in the mirror this morning. First on the stand, Captain Edward J. Smith. Or rather, his reputation. Because as you know, Captain Smith went down with the ship. Sort of. There's still some debate about that. One survivor swore they saw him swimming near a lifeboat. Others say he disappeared from the bridge, stoic to the end. You lean forward. Because here comes the first puff of smoke and mirrors. The White Star Line's lawyer, Sir Robert Finlay, starts with, "Let us remember the captain as the brave and capable man he was." And you get the sense that this inquiry might not be about uncovering what happened, so much as how politely it can be explained away. The proceedings stretch into days, then weeks. Witnesses include engineers, sailors, first-class passengers, and occasionally someone from third class who manages to sneak their way onto the docket. You notice a pattern. The higher the class, the more clear-headed and orderly their account seems. The lower, the more chaotic, and less believed. Someone brings up the lookout's missing binoculars. Remember that. The box was locked, the key left on shore. Could have helped spot the iceberg earlier. Maybe. Lord Mersey furrows his brow and says something about human error and the fog of war, which is impressive considering there was no fog that night and no war. Another topic gets serious attention: Titanic speed. Why were they going full steam ahead despite iceberg warnings? You remember it. Everyone felt it. She was flying, practically vibrating under your feet. The defence's argument is, odd. Essentially, all ships go fast, especially new ones. Especially when trying to break a record or meet an arrival deadline. And besides, Captain Smith was experienced. End of story. You blink. That's it? A few engineers testify that the ship was built to survive flooding in 4 compartments, but not 5. Titanic hit 6. It's like saying your house is fireproof, unless the fire spreads to more than 4 rooms. Then, well, here's a sobering historical fact. The British inquiry ended with 24 official recommendations, mostly technical. Better lifeboat drills, updated navigation systems, lifeboat seats for everyone. Reasonable, useful, and also completely focused on next time, the subtext. This was a learning experience, unfortunate, tragic, but not criminal. No one was held accountable, not the Board of Trade, which signed off on the outdated lifeboat requirements, not White Star Line, which encouraged speed and luxury over safety, not J. Bruce Ismay, who testified again and again that he never interfered with Captain Smith's decisions, and certainly not the shipbuilders, Harland and Wolfe. The committee went out of its way to praise the ship's design, even while admitting it wasn't quite as watertight as advertised. Oh, and the Californian? Yeah, that came up. Hard. The inquiry spent more time criticising Captain Lord of the Californian, the ship that may have ignored Titanic's distress signals, than it did analysing Titanic's own failures. And here comes your quirky fringe detail. During one particularly boring session, a journalist allegedly passed a doodle of Ismay as a penguin to a colleague. That sketch later appeared anonymously in a London tabloid. Ismay's beady-eyed face, tiny flippers standing on an iceberg captioned, "Gentlemen first." That pretty much sums up public sentiment. Ismay stayed in hiding throughout most of the proceedings. He'd hoped the British inquiry would be more forgiving than the Americans, and in many ways it was. They painted him as a man in an impossible position. Never mind that he had survived while more than 1,000 women and children had not. You leave the inquiry one day and hear 2 reporters chatting outside. One says, "They'll call this an act of God before they call it negligence." The other laughs. God had nothing to do with it. Man built the iceberg. They just didn't know it yet. By the end, you've stopped hoping for justice. Now you're just hoping people remember. You walk past the front page of the Times. The headline reads, "Titanic. British inquiry finds no gross negligence." Of course not. Negligence, maybe. Gross negligence. Too gross. You find a bench near the Thames, sit down and stare at the water. It's so calm, so quiet. Just like the ocean was after Titanic disappeared. Just like the courtroom is when a grieving mother finishes her testimony and sits down. Too calm. You think about the lifeboats again. The gates that locked third-class passengers in. The officers ordered not to go back. The people still floating when you rowed away. And yet the verdict says, no one to blame. You close your eyes and hear the band playing again. You wonder if they'd still be called heroes if they hadn't been so good at dying quietly. You hear his name before you see his face. J. Bruce Ismay, president of the White Star Line, first-class passenger on the Titanic, and the man who stepped into a lifeboat while others drowned. Depending on who you ask, he's either the villain of this whole story, or just the unlucky executive who happened to survive. You've seen the headlines by now. Ismay lives while women die. The man who jumped. Coward of the Titanic. The press has made up its mind, and the public, even more so. You can't sit in a cafe without hearing someone mutter his name like a curse. But here he is now, stepping onto a street in London with his collar pulled up and his hat pushed low. He walks fast, surrounded by lawyers and handlers, barely making eye contact with anyone. A young woman spits on the ground as he passes. He doesn't look. You follow at a distance, not to harass, just to understand. What kind of man climbs into a lifeboat while others freeze? Ismay once had a reputation as a charming visionary. He was a driving force behind Titanic's design. The floating palace meant to redefine travel. He wasn't the architect, but he was the one pushing the limits. More luxury, more size, more status. He wanted Titanic to be the ship, the crown jewel of the White Star Line. And then came the iceberg, and the decision, and the lifeboat. In his version, he boarded only after helping others. He says he waited, that no women or children were nearby, that an officer waved him in. But people don't care. They care that he lived, and Captain Smith didn't. And let's not ignore the class angle. Ismay was the millionaire who survived, while steerage families were locked behind iron gates and told to wait. People needed a symbol, someone to carry their rage, their grief, their need to blame. Ismay was it. Now for the historical fact. J. Bruce Ismay testified at both the US and British inquiries. In both, he defended his actions, calmly, methodically. He insisted he did nothing wrong, but his face told a different story. Pale, hollow-eyed, sleepless. Even those trying to defend him noticed it. One official said he looked haunted, like a man already serving a sentence. And yet, Ismay was never officially charged with anything. But let's talk about what happened next. After the inquiries, Ismay resigned from the White Star Line. Not immediately, but soon enough to be obvious. He faded from the public eye, retreated to his estate, and spent the rest of his life in relative seclusion. He refused interviews, avoided parties, wouldn't speak about the Titanic again, not even to friends. He did, however, keep a letter, written by a young boy who'd survived. It simply read, "Thank you for helping me into the boat. My mother says you saved my life." Ismay kept that letter in his study until the day he died. Now, the fringe fact. After Titanic, Ismay became so reclusive that rumours spread he'd changed his name and gone into exile in India. People claim to have spotted him living under an alias, hiding in shame. In reality, he was in the UK, quietly donating to charities and rebuilding orphanages. But the myth of the disgraced tycoon vanishing abroad was just too good for the public to let go. You think about the lifeboat, the moment when he got in. You imagine the panic, the noise, the tilt of the deck, the officer with a pistol yelling, "Lower away!" You try to place yourself in that moment. Would you have jumped? You don't know. And that's the part that chills you, because maybe you would have. Maybe that's the real reason people hate Ismay. Not because he's different, but because he isn't. Still, the damage was done. Decades later, when the Titanic wreck was discovered in 1985, Ismay's name was still synonymous with cowardice. Every documentary, every tabloid, every made-for-TV movie, there he was, in a lifeboat, head down, surrounded by women who never got the chance. And the debate rages on. Some scholars defend him, point to evidence that he did help women into boats, that he was the last to board from his section, that he didn't disguise himself or shove anyone aside. Others say none of that matters. He lived, others didn't. That's the whole case. You return to your hotel that evening and flip through a stack of newspapers. There's a cartoon of Ismay peeking out of a lifeboat like a prairie dog. Below it, the caption reads, "His name is J. Bruce, but he's no Jack." The public loved that one. You fold the paper away, unsettled. It's easy to pick a villain, harder to face the mirror. Later you walk the banks of the Thames. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet you didn't realise you'd missed. A man walking his dog nods at you. You nod back. Neither of you speaks. The river moves slowly, soft waves against stone. You close your eyes and think about all the people who went into the sea that night. The ones who never had a choice. The ones who never even made it to the deck. And then you think about Ismay, sitting alone, with a letter in his hand, trying to forget that he survived. It's weird the way people talk about dead captains. They don't just mourn them, they mythologize them. Sculpt them out of silence and salt water until all that's left is a noble statue standing firm on a doomed deck, staring death in the face with a perfect beard and steely resolve. Welcome to the Captain Smith debate, where history shrugs and says, well, maybe, and everyone else forms an opinion anyway. You're in a small maritime museum now, tucked away in a sleepy corner of Southampton. It's quiet, dusty, smells like old ropes and floor polish. There's a whole section dedicated to Titanic's captain, Edward John Smith. The millionaire's captain, they called him. Dignified, handsome, nearly ready for retirement. His portrait hangs above a polished oak display case filled with bits and pieces, a cap badge, a teacup from the officer's mess, and a postcard with his signature. You stand there a long time, reading the placard beneath the photo. Lost with the ship, last seen on the bridge. That's the official version, but here's the thing, they don't actually know. Some said he dove into the sea and was pulled under by the suction. Others claimed he swam to a lifeboat, handed in a child, then drifted off alone. One stoker swore he saw Smith with a revolver, making sure no one boarded boats ahead of women. A steward claimed the captain shot himself. Another said Smith yelled, "Be British!" and went down with a flourish. It's a choose-your-own-ending kind of situation, and every version reflects something about the person telling it. You drift into a nearby reading room where someone's left a stack of old newspapers. You flip through them. Captain Smith, hero to the end. Captain Smith dead or alive. One even speculates that he escaped in disguise and lives in Paris under an alias. You roll your eyes, but you also get it. People want closure, heroes, martyrs, symbols, and Captain Smith fits the mould a little too perfectly. White beard, navy blues, 38 years at sea. He was the man who'd never had an accident until he had the accident. Now for the historical truth. Smith really was planning to retire after Titanic's maiden voyage. That was going to be his grand farewell. Instead, his last logbook entry reads something chillingly ordinary. Ice warnings received. Understated. Almost lazy. But he wasn't lazy. Just overconfident, like everyone else. And here's the debate scholars can't quite settle. Was Captain Smith reckless, or just a product of the time? It was common for ships to push through iceberg zones. It was also common to assume a ship like Titanic couldn't be sunk in the conventional sense. Smith wasn't alone in thinking that. He was, however, in command when it hit the iceberg, delayed lifeboat launches, and failed to issue a general abandon ship order for a full 45 minutes. That's not heroic. That's panic. Or maybe it's just human. One historian argued that Smith was frozen by the enormity of it. Not the cold. The moment. That even after the impact he couldn't quite grasp that the ship, his ship, was doomed. And yet despite all that, no one really blames him. Strange, right? J. Bruce Ismay survived and was crucified in the press. Captain Smith died and got a statue, you've seen it, in Lichfield. A tall stone monument with a bronze bust. The inscription says, "Be British." Because apparently shouting vague patriotism while your ship sinks earns you a plaque. And here's a fringe fact you didn't expect. Years later, a man in Nova Scotia claimed to have found a bottle with a note inside floating near the Titanic site. It read, "From E.J. Smith. Tell my wife I did my duty. Total hoax. Proven fake." But for a few months people latched onto it like it was scripture. You sit in the museum a while longer. A little boy walks past with his dad. He points to the photo of Captain Smith and whispers, "That's the good one, right?" His dad nods without hesitation. You think about that. We don't just need heroes, we install them, especially when the truth is murky. Later that night, you take a walk down to the Southampton docks. The air smells like diesel and cold rain. The pier is quiet, but you find a plaque nailed to a wooden beam. It reads, "Captain Edward John Smith. May his soul rest at sea." You look out across the water. Somewhere out there is the spot where he disappeared. Or Dove. Or stood silent on the bridge while chaos unfurled around him. You try to imagine it. The weight of responsibility. The confusion. The feeling of being absolutely sure your ship can't sink until it does. Maybe he really did go down with the ship calmly. Maybe he froze. Maybe he fought. Maybe he ran. You'll never know. None of us will, but that doesn't stop people from carving the story into stone. You hear it for the first time before you really understand what it means. The band played on. Someone says it in passing like a line from a play, but it hangs in the air, heavy, dramatic, almost staged. You pause. Because you remember music. Not the song, not exactly, but the sound. That eerie, calm thread of melody drifting through the panic. You're in a pub now, somewhere in Belfast, not far from where Titanic was built. A framed photo hangs crooked above the fireplace. It shows 8 men in tuxedos posing stiffly with their instruments, all of them young, clean-cut, professional, and all of them dead. This is the story of Wallace Hartley and the Titanic Band. By now it's become legend. As the great ship sank, the band kept playing, not because they were told to, not because they were paid, but because they believed that music, their music, could calm people, soften the edges of panic, maybe even give some small sliver of comfort in those final moments. And apparently it worked. People still talk about it. Survivors swore it was true. The band gathered on the boat deck near the grand staircase. Some say they played ragtime. Others say they switched to hymns once the chaos started. But one tune gets mentioned more than any other. Nearer, my God, to thee. You've heard that hymn your whole life. But now it has a different flavour. Now it's soaked in seawater and lit by flare rockets. Here's the strange part. No one agrees on what their final song was. Some survivors say it was definitely that hymn. Others say it was something called Autumn, a quiet waltz popular with string quartets. One man even claimed they were still playing upbeat tunes when the ship tilted so steeply that their instruments slid across the deck. And yet, the legend stuck. It had to. In the middle of such a monstrous, messy disaster, it was a moment of grace, of order. A few men standing firm, bowing strings against chaos. Historical fact. The band really did keep playing. Multiple survivors described it. Wallace Hartley's body was later recovered from the sea. His music case still strapped to his back. The others were never found. Fringe detail. People began holding funerals for the musicians they never met. Hartley's hometown of Colne, England, saw 30,000 people line the streets for his service. His violin, found in a leather case, was eventually returned to his fiancée. She never married. She kept it by her bed until she died. You imagine the final minutes, the band trying to keep time as the deck tilts beneath their polished shoes, the sea just feet away, the screams rising, the cold cutting through their tuxedos, yet they play. Maybe their hands shake. Maybe they don't even hear the music anymore. Maybe it's the only thing they still believe in. People love this story, need this story. In a tragedy defined by failure, bad design, missed warnings, cowardice, class divides, this is one thing they can point to and say, that was good, that was brave. You sip your drink and glance around the pub. There's a bust of Wallace Hartley near the door. Someone's placed a tiny violin pin beside it. No one touches it. Later, as you wander the city streets, you see posters advertising a Titanic Band tribute concert. It's scheduled for next week. The proceeds go to a maritime memorial fund. Musicians from all over are gathering to recreate the set list, what they think the band played that night. No one can agree on the exact pieces, but they're going to try anyway. There's something beautiful about that. It doesn't matter if they get it wrong. The point is the effort. The point is showing up. Even when the deck is tilted and the lights are fading and the sea is rising, that's what the band did. And here's the scholarly debate. Were they told to play, or did they volunteer? Some believe ship officers asked them to keep passengers calm. Others argue that Hartley made the decision on his own, that he gathered the ensemble without orders and led them onto the deck, not as employees, but as human beings choosing dignity over fear. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. You sit on a bench overlooking the shipyards, thinking about the absurdity of it all. 8 musicians, unarmed, trapped on a sinking luxury liner. No lifeboat, no rescue, no chance. And what do? They open their cases, ross in their bows, and play. You close your eyes and picture it again. The stars above, the black sea below, and between them, a dying ship kept aloft for a few more minutes by the fragile beauty of music. That image haunts you more than the screams, more than the water, more than anything, because it shouldn't have happened. And yet it did. You're in an office now, not yours, just a room that smells like ink and paper and tired people. There's a typewriter clacking nearby. its rhythm aggressive like it's trying to beat the clock. Around you are stacks of folders, letters, receipts, claims. This is where the Titanic continues to sink. On land, on paper, one form at a time. You came here looking for answers or maybe something to do. Instead, you found a filing cabinet labelled White Star Line Claims Office. There's a line out the door, a mother in a black veil, a fireman from the ship whose legs haven't stopped shaking, a child with no one left to claim him, all of them holding paper, none of them holding hope. This is the part nobody wants to hear about. The aftermath in courtrooms, in ledgers, in polite little settlements. You watch as a woman explains that her husband died in the engine room, that he'd been saving for years to bring their daughter over from Ireland, that now there's no money, no way to live. The clerk hands her a form. Fill this out. Proof of employment, marriage certificate, children's birth dates. She doesn't cry, she just nods. You realise grief gets quiet after a while. Here's your historical fact. In the months after Titanic sank, over 600 lawsuits were filed against the White Star Line. Claims came in from families of the dead, survivors who lost luggage, shipping companies whose cargo went down with the ship, and workers injured in the wreck. The total value of claims? Over $16 million. White Star Line's response. They offered a settlement pool of $664,000, about 4 cents on the dollar. They claimed legal immunity under an 1851 maritime law that limited liability to the value of the ship after the accident. Since Titanic now lived on the ocean floor, that value was basically zero. Convenient, isn't it? The cases dragged on for years. Most never saw trial. People needed money, not justice, so they settled for whatever they could get. Widow? Here's $300. Lost your husband and your job? $500. A child who now has no father? We'll see what we can do. You flip through some records. One claim jumps out. A man who lost 2 sons submitted a carefully handwritten letter. He didn't ask for a specific amount. Just something, he wrote, to soften the road ahead. It was denied. Insufficient documentation. The clerk next to you sighs. Some of them lie, he says quietly. Claim they were on board when they weren't. Hope no one checks the lists. He shrugs, not unkindly. Hard to blame them, though. You look down at a pile of notes marked disputed. Dozens of names. Stories that don't quite add up. You realise Titanic wasn't just a tragedy. It was a gold rush of grief. For every real victim, someone else tried to slide into their shadow. Which leads us to the quirky fringe moment. A man in Missouri tried to sue White Star Line for $100,000, claiming Titanic had sunk with his prize-winning bull aboard. He included a photo of himself with the animal and a notarized certificate from the county fair. Investigators eventually determined he made the whole thing up. There was no bull, just a man with time, a typewriter, and a bold imagination. Still, the lawsuits weren't just about greed. Many were honest, desperate, painful. You sit with a young man who tells you he was in the boiler room when it hit, got out, survived, but can't sleep now, can't work, jumps at every loud noise. He files a claim for mental distress. They ask him for a doctor's note. He doesn't have one. There aren't doctors for this yet. You leave the office and walk into the street. There's a chalkboard in front of a bakery that reads, "Free bread for Titanic widows while supplies last." You stand there for a long time, unsure whether to feel proud of the generosity or disgusted that it's needed at all. You duck into a library next, looking for records. There's an entire shelf already devoted to Titanic. Most of it written by people who weren't there. Some sensational, some deeply researched. One book claims Titanic was sunk by a German torpedo as a cover-up. Another says she was switched with her sister ship, Olympic, in an insurance fraud scheme. You flip through it. It's ridiculous. But part of you gets why people invent these stories. They're trying to explain the unthinkable, trying to find logic in something that feels designed to punish faith. The scholars are still bickering too. Some say Titanic's rivets were substandard, brittle under cold water pressure. Others say the steel hull was too rigid. Some argue the ship could have stayed afloat if they'd hit the iceberg head-on, rather than scraping along the side. Hindsight's a genius, isn't it? You sit on a bench as the city spins around you. A girl skips past in a blue dress. She's humming something. Light, tuneful. It reminds you of the band. And suddenly you wonder what happened to all the instruments. The violins, the pianos, the sheet music floating in the dark. No one filed a claim for those. You head back to your own small room, where a letter waits on the table. It's from a woman in Wisconsin. She writes that her brother was aboard. 3rd class, bound for a job in New Jersey. No one's been able to tell her if he made it. She's heard rumours, false identifications, even a telegram that turned out to be a prank. She asks if you remember him, includes a photo. You don't, but you stare at his face anyway. He looks happy. You wonder how long that lasted. Titanic fever spreads faster than the iceberg ever could. You notice it first in the shop windows. A ceramic Titanic in a fish tank like it's just another shipwreck you can decorate your goldfish bowl with. Then you see the novelty songs. My sweetheart went down with the ship. The wreck of the Titanic. And the band played on till the end. Catchy, maudlin little numbers sung in vaudeville theatres by women in morning dresses and fake tears. You sit through one and wonder if the crowd realises this isn't fiction. Then come the books, piles of them, memoirs, diaries, sensational novels. Titanic is barely cold and already romanticised, weaponised and monetised. You watch a bookseller stack new titles next to the Bible and a box of Miracle Hair Tonic. All 3 seem to sell at the same rate. You know the facts. You were there. But now, as the public devours the tragedy in neatly bound packages, you start to feel like a ghost in your own story. One book in particular catches your eye. It's called Wreck and Sinking of the Titanic, rushed to print by May 1912, less than a month after the disaster. It's dramatic, overwritten, but people eat it up. You flip through a chapter and see your memories turned into stage directions. People you knew now flattened into archetypes. The noble captain, the hysterical woman, the craven millionaire. They forgot the scared kid who couldn't stop shivering, the quiet sailor who gave his coat to a stranger, the woman who never screamed, just stared into the sea. But that's not what sells. Then you start seeing films, silent reels projected onto white sheets in travelling shows. One features an actual survivor, Dorothy Gibson, dressed in the same outfit she wore that night, reenacting her escape for the camera just weeks after she lost friends to the sea. You sit in the back of the tent and watch her scramble into a lifeboat, dramatically waving as a cardboard Titanic tips into a kiddie pool. The audience claps. You don't. It feels hollow, like watching your own trauma as dinner theatre. You're not sure whether to be angry at her or sorry for her. Maybe both, maybe neither. There's a growing industry around Titanic now. Commemorative plates, postcards, sheet music with illustrations of broken ships and tearful angels, even Titanic-shaped ice cube moulds, if you can believe it. You overhear a woman say, "It's so romantic, isn't it?" She's talking to her friend while pointing at a print of the ship under moonlight. Romantic. You wonder if she would have thought that while clawing at the side of a lifeboat with frozen hands. And here's a fringe fact you didn't expect. A London theatre once paused a performance mid-scene in April 1912 to announce the Titanic sinking, then resumed the comedy sketch 5 minutes later. The crowd applauded both. You visit one of the travelling exhibits, a Titanic experience. Inside a warehouse, someone's rebuilt sections of the ship. First-class cabin mock-ups, a replica grand staircase, even a small lifeboat you can sit in for a photo. You see tourists posing with smiles, pretending to row. A girl in a white blouse turns to her friend and says, "Let's do the sad face." You don't even feel angry anymore, just tired. You walk outside and spot a young boy selling newspapers. His cry rings out like a bell. Titanic widow marries millionaire. Survivor claims to see ghost ship. New hero found among the dead. It's all so loud, so frenzied. You remember the silence of the lifeboats, the cold, creeping horror of watching something so huge disappear in the dark. No one's selling that. You meet a survivor friend for tea. She's one of the quieter ones, never gave interviews, always kept to herself. She tells you she's been asked to speak at a church next Sunday to give a hopeful message. She says she might go, not to be hopeful, just to be heard. You nod. You get it. Now for the historical detail. Within just 1 year of the disaster, over 80 Titanic songs were recorded or published. Multiple films were released. There were Titanic stage plays, poems, and even trading cards. Survivors were invited to give speeches, to write articles, to appear in parades. It didn't matter if they could speak well or even wanted to. The story was no longer theirs. It belonged to the world. You were approached in the street one day by a man in a bowler hat. He runs a touring lecture series and wants to know if you'll join the circuit. Just 10 minutes of your story, he says. We pay by the city. You ask who else is on the bill. He lists a clairvoyant, a sea prophet, and a woman who claims she dreamt the whole thing before it happened. You politely decline. He shrugs. Plenty of others, he says. People love a good shipwreck. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? They do. They love it. Not the loss, not the pain, but the scale of it, the drama, the mythology. Titanic is the perfect story. Hubris, beauty, death, sacrifice, class division, music, stars. And like all perfect stories, people polish it, round off the edges, replace the blood with poetry, turn screams into hymns. You return home that night to find someone's left a copy of a poem on your doorstep. It's titled The Ship of Dreams. You read the first stanza and stop. Dreams number. Nightmares have less salt, less sound. You fold it carefully and slide it under the door. Not out of disrespect. Just, you've already lived the story. You don't need it recited back to you in rhyming couplets. Maybe someday people will remember the real ship, the real people, the real cold. But tonight there's a stage play down the street with a fake iceberg and a 2-song finale. You think maybe you'll go, just to see how it ends. Sleep doesn't come easy anymore. It's not just the dreams, it's the waiting for them. You lie awake, night after night, in that in-between space where your eyes are closed but your mind is sprinting. The ceiling turns into stars, the air turns cold, and then, like clockwork, you're back in the lifeboat. It's always the same, the water, the screams, the silence after. Sometimes in the dream you're still on the deck, holding the rail as the stern rises. Sometimes you're below decks, knee-deep in freezing water, doors slamming shut as you try to find your way up. Other times you're in the lifeboat, but you're the only one in it, rowing toward nothing. You wake with a taste of salt in your mouth and your hands clenched so tight, your nails leave little crescent moons in your palms. You thought time would help. It hasn't. You're not the only one. Survivor gatherings are happening more often now, small, quiet affairs in rented church basements and hotel lounges. Not organised, just found. People who are there, finding each other like magnets, like debris pulled together in the tide. You sit in a circle with a dozen others. Some are silent. Some talk too much. One man can't stop pacing. A woman keeps knitting the same row over and over. You realise you're all measuring time the same way now, before Titanic and after Titanic. A steward from the ship says, "I can't wash dishes anymore. The sound reminds me of the ice." A young woman whispers, "I sleep in my clothes, just in case." Someone else says, "I check for lifeboats every time I board a ferry." You nod. You do that too. They call it survivor's guilt now. Not officially, not yet. But the term's floating around. It fits too well to be poetic. You survived, and someone else didn't. Someone better, kinder, braver, and you don't know how to carry that without it burning a hole through you. Here's your historical fact. Many Titanic survivors reported lifelong trauma. Some developed nervous conditions. Others couldn't ride elevators, cross bridges, or even sit in bathtubs. A few had total breakdowns within a year. One man was institutionalized after shouting "ice" during a train ride, convinced the engine was heading straight for a glacier. But trauma wasn't newsworthy, so the papers called you heroes or cowards, never human. You walk the streets differently now. Crowds feel too loud. Silence feels too sharp. You're always bracing for something. When you hear church bells, you half expect it to be a warning. One afternoon, you visit a department store. You only meant to buy socks, but as you pass the silverware aisle, your legs stop. You're staring at a set of forks, the same pattern used in Titanic's second-class dining room. You blink. Something rises in your throat. Not sadness, not fear, just a sudden urge to disappear. You leave without the socks. There's a fringe story you hear from another survivor. He swears a psychic in Boston contacted his dead brother from the Titanic through automatic writing. The message read, "It was beautiful, even in the end." You want to scoff, but part of you wants to believe it, because the version you remember, it wasn't beautiful, it was brutal. People froze to death in front of you, and no violin solo can erase that. At a bar one night, a stranger overhears you mention the ship. He leans in and asks, "What was it like?" You open your mouth, close it, and then say, "Cold." That's all. Just that one word, because if you say more, you'll say too much. After all this time, you still feel like people want the movie version, the sweeping story, the noble death, the moment of clarity, not the panic, the shoving, the mistakes. So you stay quiet. You write sometimes, in a journal you keep under your bed. Nothing fancy, just lists of memories, names of people who didn't make it, flashes of scent, sound, temperature, the clank of a lifeboat against metal, the way someone's hand slipped out of yours. You write it down because you're afraid someday your brain will try to protect you and scrub the worst parts away. And the worst parts are important. You've started keeping a small candle by your window. You light it on the 15th of every month. No one knows. It's just for you, a private lighthouse. Something to say, "I remember." Some days are better. You laugh again. You find joy in little things. Toast done perfectly. A child's laugh. A warm scarf. But even the good days have an undertow. You're never just you anymore. You're you plus Titanic. A woman you once knew, a nurse who survived with you, has started painting. She only paints ships. All of them dark. All of them alone on the sea. She sells them at market stalls. Tells people they're fictional. They're not. You recognise every angle, every light. She's painting the nightmares. She tells you, "We didn't drown, but we didn't not drown either." And yeah, that about sums it up. One night you hear a carriage pass outside and flinch. You swear it sounds like groaning metal. You sit up in bed, heart hammering, eyes wide. You want it to stop, but also you don't. Because when the dreams fade, the memory will fade too. And if you forget, who tells the real story? You don't believe in ghosts, or at least you didn't. But now, after everything, you're not as confident as you used to be. You're sitting in a drawing room lit by candles, the curtains drawn tight against the streetlights outside. The wallpaper's peeling slightly in the corners. There's a bowl of salt near the fireplace and a woman in a wide-brimmed hat arranging teacups with an unsettling level of precision. Welcome to your first Titanic séance. You didn't come here out of desperation. Not exactly. You came because someone invited you. Another survivor. She said it helps, that it gave her closure, that sometimes, when she closes her eyes, she still hears her sister calling from the water. And if there's even a sliver of a chance she can answer back, well, what would you do? You're not alone here. There are a dozen people around the table, a few survivors, mostly family members of the dead, all of them dressed like they're visiting someone in the hospital. Nervous, hopeful, bracing for news. One man clutches a watch. A woman holds a baby shoe in her lap. Another carries a rosary but doesn't touch it. The medium closes her eyes. Her voice, when it comes, is slow and breathy. Theatrical, yes, but not mocking. "Is anyone here with us tonight?" she whispers. And for a moment the whole room just breathes in unison. You don't feel anything at first, just awkward. Then the teacups begin to rattle slightly. Could be the wind, could be nerves, could be showmanship, could be something else. And here comes your fringe fact. Spiritualism exploded after the Titanic sank. Mediums claim to channel lost passengers. Seances were held in London, New York, Montreal, even on boats crossing the Atlantic. One particularly dramatic story involves a group claiming they received a message from Captain Smith himself. There is no death, only the sea. Kind of poetic if you ignore the fact that it sounds exactly like something a Victorian novelist would write. Back at your séance, the medium suddenly gasps, her head tilts back, her hands tremble. "She's cold," she says, "so cold." She says it was quiet. She says she's not alone. You don't know who she is. No one at the table claims her. But everyone's eyes go wide. The man with the watch starts to cry. Is it real? Is it fake? Does it matter? Because in that moment you remember how the cold felt, how your fingers stopped being fingers, how the air felt thick with silence after the ship went under. You close your eyes. You don't see a ghost. You see your own reflection the night after standing on Carpathia's deck, not knowing what day it is, or who's still alive, or what you're going to do next. The medium snaps out of it gently, like someone waking from a nap. She doesn't ask for money, doesn't make a show of it, just nods and says, "Thank you for coming." You walk home in silence. The street feels too empty, the stars too bright. You glance up and half expect to see Titanic sailing overhead, lit from within, like a lantern among constellations. You shake the thought. Keep walking. But the ghost stories keep coming. You read one in a paper a week later. A sailor claims to have seen a phantom ship crossing the path of his freighter in the North Atlantic. Pitch black, no lights, silent. His crew swears they saw it too. When they blinked, it was gone. A different story surfaces in Boston. A woman says her husband, who died on Titanic, appeared at the foot of her bed at the exact moment the ship went down, said goodbye, then vanished. You want to call it nonsense, but then again, you felt things too. Little things. Doors closing when there's no draft. The smell of salt in rooms with no windows. The sound of music, faint and distant when no band is playing. Some nights you dream of the water, but not the drowning. Just the floating. Peaceful. Quiet. Almost welcoming. You wake up shivering and not entirely sure where you are. The scholarly debate is ongoing. Some historians dismiss the post-Titanic spiritualism craze as pure emotional fallout, grief given shape, desperation finding expression. Others argue it was a coping mechanism dressed in Victorian lace and candle wax. Still others say it was just people trying to make $1 off the dead. And then there's the theory that trauma leaves imprints, that some places, some nights, remember what happened to them. You find yourself staring at the ocean more these days, listening to it, wondering. Because the weirdest part of it all, you're not looking for ghosts. You're just trying to figure out what parts of you died out there, and which parts came back haunted. You meet an old friend from the ship, someone you shared a lifeboat with. He says he's been dreaming about a man he never met, a man in a waistcoat who whispers numbers in French and then disappears into the fog. He laughs nervously, but his eyes don't. Another woman tells you she keeps hearing Morse code tapping from her walls. She used to live with Titanic's telegraph operator's sister. Now, she thinks the whole building carries echoes. You don't laugh at either of them, because you get it. This wasn't just a disaster. It was a tear in something. Time, faith, logic. Maybe even the border between life and death. And maybe it left a few things loose. You light a candle that night, not because you believe in ghosts, but because you believe in remembering. And if something answers back, you'll listen. It's early morning, and you're standing on the deck of a ship again. But this time, the sun is out, the seas are calm, and there's no orchestra playing your final moments. This isn't Titanic. This is a different kind of vessel, one launched not to break records or coddle millionaires, but to prevent the very thing you survived. You grip the railing and stare out across the North Atlantic. Somewhere behind you, a bell clangs. Somewhere below, an engine thuds, steady and confident. You're aboard a ship of the International Ice Patrol. After Titanic sank, it became painfully, embarrassingly obvious that ships barreling through iceberg zones without any real system for tracking floating death chunks was, in hindsight, maybe a bad idea. So the governments of the world, okay, mostly the US, with Britain reluctantly nodding, agreed to start watching the ice. They created the Ice Patrol in 1914, just 2 years after the disaster. Its mission? Monitor iceberg movements off the Grand Banks, map them, and warn other ships. Sounds simple. It wasn't. Still isn't. You were invited along for a leg of the patrol. Not as crew, not as cargo, just as a reminder. Some people on board think of you as living history. Others just nod politely and avoid eye contact, unsure if it's okay to ask you what drowning almost felt like. The ship doesn't have the luxury of Titanic. No grand staircase, no gold trim, no orchestras. But what it does have are binoculars, radios, lookouts trained to actually look, and, get this, lifeboat drills. You watch the crew conduct one before breakfast. Everyone wears life vests. Everyone knows which lifeboat is theirs. One officer yells, "Imagine we've struck ice," and no one laughs. Imagine that. The officer, a compact man with the kind of moustache that could anchor a small boat, walks over and tips his cap. "You were on her, weren't you?" he asks. You nod. He pauses. "We study her now, you know. Her deck plans, her sinking. They teach it at training academies." You wonder what it's like to be a textbook. Here's your historical fact. After Titanic, maritime law changed dramatically. Ships were now required to carry enough lifeboats for every soul on board. Lifeboat drills became mandatory. Radios had to be manned 24/7, not just during office hours. And the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was born. A legal document that basically exists because the sea got cocky and everyone finally decided to take it seriously. You head down to the communications room. It's packed with gear that looks like it was designed by someone who likes levers a little too much. Radio operators sit hunched over their stations, ears covered, fingers tapping out warnings and coordinates. One of them shows you a recent bulletin. Ice reported, latitude 42 degrees north, longitude 50 degrees west, visibility low. You shiver. That's practically the same latitude as Titanic's collision point. Outside, the fog is rolling in, slow and eerie. The captain slows the ship. Foghorn moans every few minutes like some tired sea creature warning you off. You grip the railing tighter. For a moment, the ocean feels exactly the same. Still, endless, indifferent. But this time, someone's watching. That's the point, isn't it? Titanic taught the world that being rich, famous, or unsinkable doesn't matter if no one's paying attention. So now, every ship that crosses the Atlantic in iceberg season checks in with the Ice Patrol. They get updates, maps, warnings. Someone's actually out here looking for trouble before it finds you. Of course, it's not foolproof. Icebergs don't play by rules. But it's better, safer, less arrogant. You think about how Titanic could have done this. Slowed down, posted more lookouts, responded to all of the ice warnings she received. There were 6 that day, by the way. 6. Some were shrugged off. One never even made it to the bridge. Now Ice Patrol ships send updates hourly. You eat lunch with the crew in a cramped mess hall. The mood's light. Someone jokes about having iceberg lettuce. You offer a smile, not forced, not entirely. Someone asks you if you think Titanic's wreck should be left alone or explored. You say, "It depends what they're looking for." They nod, unsure what that means. You're not sure either. You walk back to your cabin and sit on the bunk, listening to the distant sound of radar pings. The fringe fact comes to you then, something one of the younger sailors mentioned offhand. In the early days of the Ice Patrol, some captains reported seeing phantom bergs, icebergs that would appear on the horizon, then vanish completely. Sailors called them ghost ice, just a trick of the light, or maybe the past reaching through the fog. You've had your own version of ghost ice. Sometimes when the sea is still and the sky is empty, you see Titanic out there, full steam, proud and gleaming, like she never went down, like she's still trying to make New York on time. You don't wave, you return to the bridge just as the sun breaks through the fog. The officer points to the horizon. There it is, an actual iceberg. Massive, sculpted like marble, sunlight catching in crevices. Beautiful, terrifying. They mark its position, radio it in, and change course. No panic, no delay, just action. That's what Titanic taught them. You stand there a while watching it pass, and you think, not for the first time, how different things might have been if someone had done the same in 1912. If the warnings had mattered, if the pride had cracked before the hull did. But then again, maybe Titanic had to happen so this ship could exist. Maybe sometimes the world has to break before it learns to watch where it's going. You're not rich, you never were. But after Titanic, money became a whole new language, one you couldn't speak fluently even if you tried. And now, you're watching the wreckage of class not on the ocean floor but right here, on land, playing out in headlines, job offers, wedding announcements and whispers over teacups. Social class didn't sink with the Titanic. It just learned how to swim faster. You're at a garden party now, of all places. You were invited by someone you met during the US Senate inquiry, a senator's niece, curious about the real story. You didn't think you'd come, but something about free cucumber sandwiches and a quiet lawn lured you in. The crowd is polished, polite. Everyone's dressed like they've never once considered drowning. You overhear someone saying, "It's so fascinating, really. All those steerage people just gone." Then she picks up a canapé like she didn't just refer to actual humans as those steerage people. You look around and realise you're one of the only survivors here from second class, let alone third. The rest? They're dressed in tailored suits, shining jewellery that might have been worn on Titanic, and grief softened by inherited wealth and soft piano music. You sip your tea, it tastes like nothing. A man approaches you. You recognise him. A Titanic first-class passenger, survived with barely a scratch. He smiles, says he remembers you from the Carpathia. "I've been so busy since," he says. 3 book offers, and Good Morning America wants to interview me next week." You raise an eyebrow. "We were on a boat that sank." He waves it off. "Yes, but it's all about what you do with it, isn't it? I say seize the narrative." "Seize the narrative. Right. Here's your historical fact. First-class survivors often fared significantly better after the disaster than their lower-class counterparts. Not just financially, emotionally, legally, socially. Many of them returned to jobs waiting for them. Houses, networks. A few even became celebrities. They were invited to speak at events, publish memoirs, sit on boards to prevent future tragedies. Some even got richer. Meanwhile, steerage survivors arrived in America with nothing but a new trauma and the clothes on their backs, often borrowed ones. Some found family, some were deported, a handful were institutionalized, others just disappeared into the working class, buried by time and bureaucracy. You speak to one woman, an Irish domestic worker who survived thanks to a lifeboat launched near the very end. She's been trying to find work for weeks. Every employer says the same thing. They don't want someone damaged by tragedy. She leans in and whispers, "They liked me better when I was just an immigrant. Now I'm complicated." You help her draft a new reference letter. You leave off the Titanic entirely, but it's not all downward. Some stories flip. Like Molly Brown, you know her, of course. The press called her unsinkable, and she lived up to the name. She used her survival as a springboard, campaigning for workers' rights and women's suffrage, gave speeches, raised funds for other survivors. She refused to be silenced, or tidied into a neat little footnote. Or the Navratil boys, 2 little French boys taken aboard Titanic by their father during a custody dispute. He died, but they survived. They were too young to tell anyone their names. No one knew who they were for weeks, just the Titanic orphans. But when their mother finally found them, they became living proof that fate could occasionally do something kind. Those stories go in the newspapers, the others don't. You visit a boarding house where a handful of third-class survivors now live. Shared rooms, sparse meals. One woman gave birth a month after the sinking. Her husband didn't make it. She named the child Hope. They sit around the kitchen, reading from a tattered paper with the headline, Titanic's Lessons for the Future. We are all equal at sea. They laugh, not bitterly, just flat. 'Cause no, you weren't. Even in death you weren't. Here's something strange. When the bodies were recovered from the water, many were buried by class. First class passengers got coffins, second class got canvas bags, third class, often nothing at all. In the cemetery at Halifax, where many Titanic victims lie, the headstones don't list occupations, but you can tell by the dates, the names, the missing. The fringe fact. A rumour spread after the sinking that a first-class man disguised himself as a woman to board a lifeboat. Some say he wore a shawl, others say he pushed an actual child aside. It was never proven, but the idea stuck. And in a way, the rumour was never about him. It was about class resentment, about people finally seeing that wealth didn't necessarily mean honour. You read one letter to the editor that says, "The iceberg did what God could not. It humbled the rich." But did it? No. You sit in a park later that week watching children play. One's wearing a little sailor cap. His mother says he wants to go to sea someday, just like the brave boys on Titanic. You wonder what version of the story she's told him. You wonder what version you would tell if asked. Because here's the real complicated truth. Titanic didn't erase the class lines. It underlined them, but it also exposed them for everyone to see. The lifeboats, the locked gates, the rescue priorities, the survival rates. It made people talk, argue, question, some for the first time, and maybe that's something, not justice, but a start. You're standing in a warehouse full of forgotten things, trunks, suitcases, waterlogged diaries, hats that smell like mothballs and coal smoke. There's a violin case with no violin and a baby's christening gown that was never worn. No one claims them. No one remembers who they belong to. And so, here they sit, silent, sealed, and slowly being swallowed by time. You're in Halifax again. Same city where so many of Titanic's dead were brought ashore. But this place? It holds what's left of the people who didn't make it, and weren't remembered. The unclaimed. It's a strange feeling, walking through aisles of other people's lives, each one reduced to a label. Body number 150, male, estimated age 30, found with silver flask. That's all. That's it. And if no one came forward, their belongings were boxed, their names slipped into oblivion, and their story, whatever it was, got shelved next to someone else's. You pause by a trunk marked Irish Emigrant Steerage. Inside, a worn Bible, 2 shirts, and a letter written in shaky pencil on lined paper. You don't read the whole thing. You can't. Just the first line. "Tell Ma I made it on board." You close the lid. Not everyone got a movie ending. Not everyone got a line in the newspaper. Most of Titanic's victims were like this. Quiet, ordinary people with no backup plan, no estate, no one powerful waiting at the dock. And when they died, they left behind luggage that outlived them. You ask the clerk how often these items are claimed. She shrugs. Not often. Sometimes a relative digs up a connection. But most, they just stay. You ask what happens to them eventually. She doesn't answer. Now for the historical fact. Roughly 700 Titanic passengers were never identified. Some bodies were buried without names. Others were never found at all. And over 100 unclaimed suitcases, many from steerage passengers, sat in storage for decades. Some were eventually moved to museums. Others were destroyed when the storage fees stopped being paid. Think about that. People lost their entire family and couldn't afford to claim their own belongings. You move to a corner table where a staffer is cataloguing items for a display. You glance over her shoulder. She's holding a photo of a young couple. Their clothes are formal, but their smiles are crooked, playful. On the back, engaged. April 5th, 1912, boarding Titanic together. You ask if they made it. She shakes her head. They never even made it to a lifeboat. And here's your fringe fact. In the weeks following the disaster, a storage room in New York became filled with hundreds of unclaimed bags and trunks. Staff called it Titanic's attic. Some people eventually came to identify items, but many didn't. Some had died in steerage with no known relatives. Others had changed their names to immigrate quietly, leaving no paper trail. And some, no one even knew they were on the ship. You leave the warehouse heavy, like you've been borrowing other people's grief for too long. Later that day, you visit a memorial on a hill near the cemetery. Simple granite stones, most engraved with just a number and the words unknown male or unknown child. You walk between the rows, reading the ones with names, trying to imagine who they were. Some give you scraps. Waiter, age 22. Fireman from Southampton. Girl, age 4, travelling with mother. Then one catches your eye. Elias Nicola Yared, age 14, Syrian emigrant. You pause, because you've never seen his name in any movie. No statue, no street named after him. But here he is. All he had was a ticket in steerage and a dream someone probably told him he was too young to chase. He didn't make it. And somehow this little stone overgrown with moss is all that's left of him. You find out later that entire families were lost this way. A family of 8 from Finland. Gone. A newlywed couple from Sweden. Gone. Whole households erased. And because they weren't rich, or British, or famous, history didn't keep them above water for long. You sit on a bench nearby watching wind ripple the grass. A girl walks past holding her grandfather's hand. She points to one of the stones and asks, "Why doesn't it have a name?" He answers softly, because no one was left to say it. You close your eyes. You think about the things people leave behind when they die. Not just suitcases and pocket watches, but names, connections, people who know your face, remember your laugh, carry your stories. Some of Titanic's passengers left behind nothing but silence. And in a world obsessed with heroes, silence rarely gets remembered. So you sit, and you remember them. Not with flowers, not with speeches. Just by not looking away. Just by knowing they were here. Even if no one else does. You hear the same story 3 different ways. In one version, he was a wealthy English gentleman who gave up his seat in a lifeboat to a stranger. In another, he was a coal trimmer from County Cork who slipped into a boat under a false name. And in the third, she was a Spanish widow who never boarded Titanic at all, but told everyone she had just to feel important. Same ship, different tales. It doesn't take long to realise that, after Titanic, some survivors didn't just live, they rewrote. You're in a boarding house now in Boston. The landlady keeps a little notebook of all the guests who claim to have survived Titanic. There are 5 names. You're pretty sure 2 of them were never on the ship. One says she was saved by a dolphin. Another insists he climbed into a lifeboat with Captain Smith, who definitely survived, just faked his death. Right. It starts as curiosity. You compare their stories with the actual passenger lists. You dig into shipping records. Some don't match, others are impossible. But the strangest thing? They believe it. Or at least they want to. You track down one man who tells you he was the last one off the ship. He says he held the hand of every child as they boarded the lifeboats, that he lit the final flare. You remember him? He was in your lifeboat. Silent the whole time. Now he's got an entire act. I needed to matter, he tells you over a cup of tea. I didn't do anything heroic that night. I just sat there. You don't argue. You understand. Because the guilt of survival does strange things to memory. It shapes it. Sandpapers it. Then, if you're not careful, it sculpts you into someone you can stand to look at in the mirror. That's the quiet tragedy of it. Not all the lies are malicious. Some are just wounds stitched with fiction. But some are just opportunists. Here's your historical fact. Within a year of Titanic's sinking, at least a dozen people falsely claimed to be survivors. Some did it for fame, some for money. One woman impersonated a Titanic widow to secure a pension. Another man toured vaudeville halls claiming to be the iceberg's witness, insisting he had psychic visions of the sinking, despite being nowhere near the Atlantic in 1912. No social media, no background checks, just charisma and a good sob story. And it worked. For a while. You meet a woman named Clara, claims to have lost her husband and 2 sons on Titanic. Tells the story so well, with just the right catch in her voice, that you almost believe her. Until you ask what deck she boarded on. She says, the red one. You nod, thank her, and walk away. Here's the fringe fact. A man in Chicago spent years claiming he was the only person to escape from below decks, once the watertight doors were sealed. He swore he swam through an air pocket, followed a cat through a ventilation shaft, and surfaced into a lifeboat. The press ran the story. People sent him money. The truth? He'd never left Illinois. But the public didn't really care. They wanted stories. You find yourself staring at your own reflection more often these days, thinking, what version of my story would sell? You never pushed anyone, never jumped the line, but you didn't row back either. You didn't fight harder for the ones still screaming in the water. You lived, and for some people that's suspicious enough. You're invited to a Titanic-themed dinner in a hotel ballroom. Everyone's in costume, women in flapper gowns, men with fake moustaches and pocket watches. A string quartet plays Nearer My God to Thee. You find a seat at a replica table with replica china, replica menus. One man leans in and says, I was on board too. You glance at him. He looks familiar, but not from the ship, from the newspapers, from one of those letters to the editor that was quickly retracted. He's telling the woman next to him about how he helped steer the ship after the iceberg struck. He says he held the wheel himself. You know for a fact that's not true. You say nothing. What would it change? The truth's already waterlogged. Later that night you reread your journal. The real one. You're surprised by how sparse it is. No drama. No big heroic moment. Just cold. Noise. Blisters on your hands. A woman who couldn't stop praying in German. A man who went quiet and never spoke again. It doesn't read like a movie. It reads like survival. You think about how some people tell their stories like they earned their place in the boat. You didn't earn it. You just got it. Maybe that's the part that makes it hard to talk about. Not the fear, not the grief, the randomness, the pure, stupid, unshaped chance of it. You close the journal and no edits, no embellishments. It's messy, which means it's probably honest. You didn't think you'd ever go back, but here you are, on a ship, headed to the coordinates, the place where Titanic went down. Not figuratively, not in your dreams, the real spot. Cold, remote, dead centre of the North Atlantic. It's part of a memorial voyage, a tribute they call it. A modern liner retracing Titanic's path, with a ceremony planned at the exact time and place the ship slipped under. You didn't want to come. Then someone mailed you a ticket. No note, just the ticket. You said yes. Now, as the engines hum and the stars unfold above you, the memory creeps in. You haven't been out here since 1912. The water looks the same, the sky too, but everything else, different. There's radar now, GPS, safety drills, lifeboats stacked and ready. Someone even hands you a fleece blanket just for being on deck after dark. You shake your head. That's what people get now, blankets. You got panic, splinters, and an ocean full of screaming. Around you are other descendants, historians, survivors' families. Some dressed in vintage outfits, some holding candles, some holding each other. It's quiet, reverent. No one's joking. Even the sea seems to be holding its breath. They serve dinner that night from the original first-class menu. You skip it. The idea of filet mignon and oysters feels obscene this close to the wreck. You sip water and stare out at the nothing. Here's your historical fact. In 2012, on the 100th anniversary of the sinking, a memorial cruise followed Titanic's original route, stopping for a service at the sinking site. Hundreds aboard. Bagpipes played. Flowers were tossed into the sea. At precisely 2:20 a.m., the time Titanic vanished. They held a moment of silence. That's what you're here for now. Your version is earlier, but the feeling's the same. Night thickens, You gather with others near the bow, someone reads the names aloud. Not just the famous ones, the forgotten ones. Every child, every coalman, every maid. You close your eyes and picture them. The Turkish bath attendant who'd only worked on the ship for 5 days. The stoker who missed his first voyage due to a toothache and got on Titanic instead. The violinist who played till the deck tilted, bow shaking in frozen fingers. The baker who floated for hours in the water and lived, whiskey keeping his blood warm. You feel them, not like ghosts, not like myths, like people. Then comes the fringe moment. Someone on deck starts humming, just lightly. It takes you a second to recognise the tune. It's Nearer My God to Thee. Of course it is. Others join in, soft, off-key, respectful. You don't sing, you just breathe it in. The ship slows. A bell tolls once, twice, 3 times. At 2:20 they lower wreaths into the water. You step forward with your own offering, a tiny tin case. Inside it, a letter you wrote but never sent, to someone you left behind. You drop it into the sea. The water swallows it with no sound. Later, in your cabin, you can't sleep. You stand at the porthole and watch the ocean move. A different ship, a different time, but the same silence underneath it all. You think about how Titanic is still down there, her hull decaying, her grand staircase collapsed, her rooms filled with silt and ghosts of velvet. You think about the shoes still resting on the seabed, soles facing skyward, the champagne bottles unpopped, the porcelain doll, arms wide open, and you think about all the people who'll never visit this place, who've only seen it through glass-bottom subs or James Cameron's lens. People who can't imagine the cold, or the blackness, or the way your lungs tighten when the water rises past your ribs. But you can. You lived it. And now, for the first time, you've come back not out of obligation or accident, but choice. It feels complete. Not healed, not forgiven, just closed. You press your hand to the glass. Out there, 12,000 feet down, the ship sleeps. Her bones picked clean by time and pressure. But still, there's something sacred about the spot. Not because of the steel, because of the lives, the last words, the unfinished songs, the ones who said goodbye, and the ones who never got the chance. Some call it a graveyard, others call it a museum. You don't call it anything, you just listen. At sunrise, you're on deck again. The sea is calm. A seal bobs in the distance. A gull circles overhead, probably wondering why so many people are standing still on a perfectly moving boat. Someone says, "It's strange, isn't it? How one moment in history can echo forever." You nod, because that's exactly what this is. An echo, not just of tragedy, of lives, of warnings, of music, and somehow, still, of beauty. By now you've realised that Titanic didn't just sink once. It sinks again and again, in newspaper headlines, in museum exhibits, in misremembered quotes and tearful documentaries. It's gone, yes. But it never really leaves. You see it in strange places. A little girl in a pink hoodie playing with a toy cruise ship, crashing it into the bathtub and shouting, "Iceberg!" A bakery selling Titanic-shaped cookies in April. A late-night host making a joke about rearranging deck chairs. You laugh, sort of, then you don't. Because it's funny until you remember that people really drowned on those deck chairs. You're walking through a museum now, one of the big ones. A sprawling Titanic exhibition, complete with replica cabins, a mock iceberg you can touch, and a passenger boarding pass printed with someone's real name. At the end, you find out if your person lived or died. It's a game, a very polite one. Families file through, kids press their palms to the cold faux ice. Teens take selfies on the replica grand staircase. You trail behind them, quiet, as your pass plays out like set dressing. You stop in front of a display, recovered artifacts from the wreck. Inside the case is a delicate pair of leather shoes, toddler-sized. The card reads, "Recovered near the body of an unknown child, preserved by deep sea pressure, possibly worn by Sidney Leslie Goodwin, aged 19 months. You take a step back, because you know that name. You met his mother. Her voice was soft, her hands always busy. She was carrying the baby when the lifeboats filled up. She didn't make it on board. Neither did he. You never asked why they were headed to America. It didn't seem important then. It does now. That's the thing about time. It makes details heavy. You find another case, a pocket watch, stopped at 2:22 a.m., 2 minutes after Titanic vanished. A steward's cap, a porcelain plate cracked down the middle but otherwise intact. Each item feels like it's holding its breath. Here's your historical fact. Over 5,500 items have been recovered from the Titanic wreck site since the first dives in the 1980s. Personal belongings, ship fittings, dishes, letters, perfume bottles that still smell like violets. Some are displayed in travelling exhibits. Others sit in dark storage, sealed away in climate-controlled rooms like ancient relics waiting for someone to ask the right question. There's a debate, of course, whether it's right to take artefacts from a grave. Some say Titanic is sacred ground, not a treasure chest. Others argue that preserving these items tells the stories better than letting them rot in silence. Scholars, historians and corporations have argued about it for decades. The wreck site has become a legal tug-of-war, wrapped in international maritime law and commercial salvage rights. You've read the lawsuits. They use words like recovery zones and cultural value, but not often enough do they say human. You reach a final room. It's dimly lit. The wall reads, "In memory of the 1,496 souls lost on April 15th, 1912. A screen flickers to life, scrolling through the names. Slowly, alphabetically. You spot ones you knew. Some you didn't even realise had died until their names appear now. You stand in silence. People around you whisper, pointing at unfamiliar surnames. You stay quiet. Then something strange happens. A boy, maybe 10, turns to you and asks, 'Were you on the ship?' You freeze. He doesn't look like he's joking, just curious. You could lie, say no. But something in you is tired of shrinking from the question. You nod. 'Yeah,' you say. 'I was.' He tilts his head. 'What was it like?' You think for a long moment. 'Loud,' you say, 'and quiet, and long, and short.' He frowns. 'That doesn't make sense.' 'Neither did the ship,' you reply. He grins and runs off to the mock steering wheel. You stay behind, watching him navigate an imaginary course through plastic stars. The fringe detail here is almost absurd. In the 1990s, Titanic memorabilia started showing up in auctions. Not artifacts, but merchandise. Paper napkins from the final meal. Salt shakers, rescued from the wreck. Some were real, most were fake. People paid thousands either way. Someone even sold a chunk of coal from the wreck site, framed in glass, complete with a commemorative plaque. You see some of that in the museum gift shop. Replica teacups, reproductions of third-class tickets. One shelf sells t-shirts that say, "I survived Titanic, 1912 tour." You stare at them for a while. You don't buy one. You walk out into the daylight, a little dazed. The world is loud again. Cars. Laughter. Someone talking on a phone about lunch plans. You sit on a bench outside the museum and let it all rush past you. You wonder what it means to be remembered when most people only remember the surface. The iceberg. The orchestra. The romance. Not the confusion. Not the firemen who kept the power going until the last second. Not the people who didn't make a scene. Not the ones who died quietly in rooms no one ever reached. Not the child's shoes. You close your eyes and try to summon their names. Not the museum versions, the real ones. Your own silent inventory, because that's what memory is, isn't it? A quiet, persistent act of defiance. It's winter again. Not that it matters much anymore. After Titanic, seasons lose a bit of their personality. Cold is no longer just weather. It's a condition, permanent and cellular. It sneaks into your bones when you least expect it. A draft under a door, a sudden gust while crossing the street, the metallic chill of a spoon from the freezer drawer. You flinch, still. You're in your flat, wrapped in layers, even though the fireplace is doing its best. There's a pot of tea steeping. You've learned to appreciate quiet rituals. Tea, wool socks, newspaper folded just so. You've even started a small garden, indoors. Herbs. Basil's doing okay. The mint, not so much. You'd think by now people would stop asking about Titanic, but they don't. Letters still arrive, usually in shaky handwriting, sometimes from students doing school reports, sometimes from museums, sometimes from relatives of passengers you've never met, hoping you remember something, anything about their great-aunt Maureen or cousin Philippe. You try to answer when you can. It's not a burden. Not exactly. Just another kind of remembering. You open a letter today that's different. Short. Plain. Just one question. Do you believe we learned anything? You sit with that one, do you? Because here's the hard part. The world moved on. The Ice Patrol watches the sea. Ships now sail with enough lifeboats. Radios run all night. Crew members know the evacuation plans. The basics, those got fixed. But the rest, the pride, the blind faith in machines, the assumption that someone else is paying attention, that? Not so much. Here's your historical fact. Just 3 years after Titanic, another luxury liner, the Lusitania, was torpedoed by a German U-boat. Over 1,100 people died. No iceberg, just war. But once again, there were lifeboat failures, poor emergency response, panic, and like Titanic, Lusitania became a symbol, less of safety failure, more of political outrage. We don't always learn. Sometimes we just shift the narrative. You write back, yes, but not enough. Then you add, and maybe that's the point. Because maybe Titanic isn't a lesson you learn once, and maybe it's the kind of story that has to be retold again and again, because forgetting it is far too easy. You meet with the journalist next. She's writing a feature for the anniversary, some big spread with glossy paper and dramatic quotes. She asks you questions while her assistant scribbles notes. What did it feel like? Have you forgiven the White Star Line? Do you believe the captain made the right choice? You answer what you can, dodge what you can't. Then she asks the one that stops you. If Titanic hadn't sunk, what kind of person do you think you'd be today? You don't answer right away. You think about how, before the ship, you were just a name on a list. You had a plan, a destination, a job maybe, a family you were trying to reach, or run from, or both. After Titanic, you became a story. You don't even remember who you were trying to become before it happened. That version of you sank too. And the fringe detail. Someone once tried to organise a Titanic Survivors Association cruise years later. A reunion at sea. It never really came together. Too many emotions, too many arguments about who got to tell the official story. But one man did book passage anyway. Alone. He said he wanted to face the ocean one more time. He never came back. You finish the interview and walk her out. She thanks you, says she'll send you a copy of the article. You nod, but you probably won't read it. Because no matter how many times it's written down, it never captures the space between seconds. The decisions that made no sense in the moment. The slipper you stepped over. The hand you didn't grab fast enough. The man who looked you in the eye and said, "You go." You never saw him again. You sit back down at the table. The tea's gone cold. Nah. You think about how the world keeps trying to summarise Titanic, turn it into a paragraph, a headline, a soundbite. You were there. It wasn't a summary. It was days of chaos compressed into 2 hours of memory. It was too many faces to remember and too few names etched into stone. It was no one being ready and everyone pretending they were. You light your candle again. It's December 14th, not the anniversary, not anything. But the ocean doesn't care about calendars. You stare at the flame and think, weirdly, about socks. How most people on Titanic died with their shoes still on, because they didn't want to be impolite or panic too early. That's how deeply manners were ingrained. People didn't want to make a scene while dying. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the steel or the iceberg or the orchestra. But the human capacity to keep pretending everything's fine, Even as the floor tilts and the stars spin and the air freezes in your lungs, you snuff the candle. No prayers, just memory. You're dreaming again, but it's not the usual kind. No cold water, no screaming, no lifeboat ropes carving into your palms. This time you're back on the promenade deck, but it's bright outside. Almost too bright, like the whole sky's been polished. The deck is clean, the air smells of sea salt and baked bread, and in the distance someone is playing a piano. Not frantically, not for their life, just playing. Calmly. You walk past familiar faces. Some nod, some smile. All of them alive. The strange thing, no one is talking about the iceberg. You wake up uneasy. Because that might be worse than the nightmares. For so long your memories have been sharp, urgent, made of ice and screams and lifeboat splinters. But now, they're softening, muting. Your brain, after all this time, is trying to let go, and you're not sure you want it to. You get out of bed, walk to the window, and watch a dog bark at a pigeon on the street below. Life. Normal. Ongoing. 100 small things happening while you try to remember the exact colour of the sky at 2:18 a.m. on April 15th. You meet someone new today. Not a journalist, not a historian, just a stranger at the post office who notices the return address on your envelope. "You were there, weren't you?" they ask. "On the Titanic?" You hesitate, then nod. They say, "Must have been amazing." You blink. "Amazing? Oh, I mean terrible, obviously," they backpedal. "But also, I don't know, legendary." Legendary. Like you were part of some great fantasy quest instead of a logistical failure at sea. You manage a polite smile, but inside you're wondering if you've become less a person and more a myth. And what happens when myths outlive memory? Here's your historical fact. Over time, many Titanic survivors stopped speaking publicly. As the years passed, some found that each retelling felt less like therapy and more like performance. They grew tired of being asked the same questions, of seeing the tragedy rewritten as a morality tale, or a romance, or worse, a punchline. One survivor, Eva Hart, once said, "Why does everyone keep calling it a story? It wasn't a story. It was a night I lived through." You get it. You walk by a bookstore later that afternoon. In the window, yet another new book about the ship. The cover shows a man in a tuxedo holding a woman in a ball gown as the ship sinks behind them in golden light. The tagline reads, "Love, Ice, Destiny." You roll your eyes so hard you almost fall over. Inside you find the history section. Skim a few chapters. Most are accurate-ish. Some veer straight into fantasy. One claims there was a mummy on board in the cargo hold that cursed the ship. Fringe fact. That mummy story actually made the rounds after the disaster. Supposedly, a haunted Egyptian artifact was being transported in Titanic's hold, and its wrath brought the ship down. Completely untrue. But the tale took off in tabloids, proving once again that people will believe anything except boring old reality. You put the book back. On your way out, the cashier says, "You look familiar." You just smile and say, "I get that a lot." Because what are you supposed to say? You're probably confusing me with the ghost of every poor decision humanity made in 1912. The truth is, you've spent so long carrying this inside you, the thought of letting it fade feels almost disrespectful. And yet, fading is exactly what time does. You find yourself back at home later that night, flipping through your old journal. You count the pages. They're nearly full now, and you never meant to write so much. You never meant to need to. But these pages are the only place where you're not edited, remembered incorrectly, or turned into a symbol. They're just you. You start a new page. April 15th is coming again. You write it in large letters like you're announcing something. And you kind of are. The anniversary used to be unbearable. Now it's quiet, heavy but softened. Less like a wound, more like scar tissue that aches before a storm. You glance around the room. Shelves lined with letters. That one photo of the Carpathia's deck. A small, faded piece of the ship's menu tucked into a frame. The candle by the window. You light it, like you always do. And for the first time you realise maybe the world doesn't need more books or movies or monologues about Titanic. Maybe it just needs people to remember without turning it into a spectacle. Maybe all that's needed is someone sitting quietly with a flickering light saying to the sea, "I remember." Not perfectly, not always publicly, but honestly. The world will keep spinning, ships will keep sailing, people will keep calling it a story, but you'll know better. You were there. You still are in a way. And that's enough, and it's the anniversary again. You don't mark it with flowers or speeches. No press, no crowds. You don't even open the newspaper. But you do wake up at exactly 2:20 a.m, like your body still remembers the moment even when your mind pretends to forget. You lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hush of traffic outside, the occasional creak of the pipes. Not ocean sounds exactly, but still, there's a rhythm to them, a pulse, like the heartbeat of a city that doesn't know it's sleeping through history. You rise, pad barefoot across the floor, light your candle. The room glows gold and flickery. You sit beside it, just breathing. You don't need to say anything. You've already said it all over the years. To reporters, to museums, to that blank page in your journal. You've said it in your silence, in your dreams, in the way your hands still tremble when you hear rushing water. But tonight feels different. Not quieter, just more settled. Like your memory is finally sitting in its proper place. Not behind you, not ahead, but right here, beside you. Companion, not burden. You pull out one last envelope. The letter inside is already written, folded neatly, yellowed a little at the edges. It's addressed to someone who never made it, someone who gave up their seat, someone who waved you off with that terrible hollow half smile like they knew what was coming. You never mailed it, because there was nowhere to send it. But you wrote it anyway. You open it, read it slowly. A few lines catch you off guard. You forgot how raw it was, how young you were. The letter is full of apologies, regrets, things left unsaid. You were trying to make sense of what happened before the world turned it into headlines and postcards. You consider burning it. Then you fold it back up and slide it into the journal. Let it stay. Let it exist. Here's your final historical fact. The last living Titanic survivor died in 2009. Her name was Milvina Dean, and she was just 9 weeks old when the ship sank. She never remembered the sinking itself, only the aftermath. She spent her life politely declining interviews and quietly watching the world turn her family's tragedy into entertainment. You remember her. You met her once. She was quiet, kind, funny in a dry sort of way. She said Titanic was something she inherited, not something she chose. You understood that. The legacy of Titanic never really belonged to just the ship. It belonged to the people who carried the aftershock. And now, that circle is closing. The fringe detail. Somewhere in a basement archive, a research group is trying to digitally reconstruct the Titanic wreck site. They're building a 3D map from sonar and remote cameras down to the last bolt and teacup. The idea is to preserve it before nature takes back what's hers. Ice, pressure, time, all conspiring to erase what's left. One day there will be no wreck, just data, just the idea of a ship, just stories. And you'll be part of that. Not because of your name or your quote in a book or your lifeboat assignment, but because you were there. Because you remembered. You lean back and let the candle flicker. You think about the final moments, how people helped strangers, lied to comfort each other, gave up seats, sang through the chaos. How some were brave, some were selfish, and most were just scared. How human it all was. No myth, just people. You wonder if future generations will understand that, or if they'll keep dressing it up in ball gowns and violin solos. You blow out the candle, the room goes dark, but your memory doesn't. It glows, quietly, steady, permanent. You lie down again, blanket pulled up to your chest, heartbeat slow. You're not waiting for nightmares anymore, not afraid of ice or water or the weight of remembering. Now you're just still. And for the first time in a long time, you don't feel like you're floating above your life, waiting for the rescue ship. You are the rescue ship, and you made it. So, here we are, at the end of a story that was never supposed to happen but did. A ship that couldn't sink, sank. People who had plans, futures, birthdays coming up, they became statistics, headlines, footnotes. But not you. You kept breathing. You carried the memory through courts and letters, museum halls and sleepless nights, through interviews that asked the same questions, and through strangers who swore they knew the real story better than you did. You watched the world move on, watched it mythologize, romanticize, parody, package it into glossy covers and pop ballads and foam iceberg toys for swimming pools, and still you remembered. Because that's what survival is sometimes, not a triumph, just a decision to not forget. Now, here in the hush of your room, with the candle out and the air still, you finally feel something that might be peace. Not the kind that pretends it didn't happen, but the kind that knows it did, and still lets you sleep. Let the ship rest. Let the water be quiet. Let the names be said, even if only in your mind. And let you, after all these years, be still enough to drift, not in fear, but in memory. It's okay now. You made it. Close your eyes. We're not sinking anymore.